Hello, and welcome to the MRW Conference on Modern Day Slavery. I'm very pleased indeed to introduce this event. MRW first reported on modern slavery in the waste sector in 2016, when police raided a scrapyard in the West Midlands on suspicion that people were victims of forced labour. They discovered one man working despite having a broken shoulder, while others were displaying signs of malnutrition. We didn't know it then, but this was part of Operation Fort, the UK's largest investigation into modern-day slavery. And only last week, 3 more gang members were convicted for their role in luring hundreds of people from Poland to the UK with the promise of well-paid jobs and good accommodation. Operation Fort may be the biggest, but it's certainly not an isolated incident. It's certainly the most widely known one. We are aware of recycling firms implicated in cases in the northeast and other areas. As we will hear today, there are ongoing cases involving waste recycling sites. The location may change, but the story does not. Victims are housed in poor, often unsanitary accommodation. They are under constant threat of violence or face actual assault. Gang members force them to work by keeping most of their wages and depriving them of freedoms. Victims have also been told their families back home are at threat unless they cooperate. Some victims have spoken on their experiences, and it's something we should all sit up and take notice of. It is important to recognise that victims are often moved from one industry to another. One day they may be at a recycling site, the next at a construction site. The whole supply chain faces risks from organised criminals. No business sector works in isolation from others. A few years back, MRW revealed figures from the Hope for Justice charity that around 2/3 of victims they work with had been placed at a waste or recycling site at some point during their ordeal, and then often moved on to other sectors. This one simple fact led to many more people across the waste and recycling sector to sit up and take notice. It can be hard for many people to believe that forced labour exists in the UK in the 21st century. Many times I've heard people say, if they don't like the job, they can leave. To a certain extent, I can understand this attitude because the crime is so well hidden. Criminals are very clever manipulators. But since the creation of the Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority, the enactment of the 2015 Modern Slavery Act, the appointment of an independent anti-slavery commissioner and other measures, there is now no excuse for any business not taking this issue seriously. Many waste management firms have been working very hard indeed to identify the potential threats, such as training site managers to spot the signs, checking how shift workers are paid, and collaborating with experts in the field. Some of the firms that were caught up in Operation Fort are to be commended for leading the way, and we will hear more about that later today. We will also hear about cross-sector working groups and how professional bodies are responding. When MRW held a roundtable on modern slavery in 2019, the question was raised, how many casual labourers are there in the sector? For surely this group is the most vulnerable to forced labour. There was no real answer to that. While larger companies can appoint a recruitment agency which has the necessary safeguards, these companies also have HR departments and possibly even an in-house legal team. The majority of waste firms are smaller regional players without those kind of resources. It may be that a small site advertises on Facebook for a casual worker and makes no background checks. We simply don't know the scale of the potential problem. This conference was set up to look at what the sector is doing, what needs to be done, and to spread the message as widely as possible. We will also hear from a charity that works directly with victims to help them get back on their feet after their ordeal. It is important we understand the effect it can have on people and what we can do to help. But focusing on modern slavery is not just a matter of duty, it is also a matter of business's bottom line. Increasingly, retailers are demanding their supply chains provide proof that workers are not being exploited. And we are heading to a situation where those companies that do not have the necessary procedures and safeguards in place will not get the contract. In our sector, there's a lot of subcontracting of services. It is not just a case of making sure that your own business has a safeguarding in place, but also making sure that the contractors of a consignment of waste, that the consignment of waste is passed on to, has the correct procedures. It is really a part of a wider duty of care to employees. The waste sector faces many pressures. It is highly regulated and often the brunt of adverse media reports on illegal dumping and illegal exports. The vast majority of operators run their sites safely, cleanly, and effectively. It must be frustrating for those operators to see the industry get a bad name. But an important point here is that modern slavery gangs can infiltrate well-run sites. As I said before, gangs are highly proficient at concealing their activities. This is why we need to be constantly vigilant. We cannot say the problem only affects poorly run sites. I want this event to be as useful to the sector as possible. And today we will hear from regulators, industry bodies, enforcement agencies, and experts on modern slavery. From my perspective, I have seen the industry go from not wanting to speak publicly at all on the issue to backing events such as this. I attended an online event last year at which former Prime Minister Theresa May spoke. She was also a key figure behind the 2015 Modern Slavery Act. That very day, she had seen a waste vehicle emblazoned with an anti-slavery campaign message. We have certainly come a long way. There will be a chance to quiz speakers and panelists throughout the day, and we have a dedicated Q&A session at 12:20. Please send your questions in via the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen on Zoom. We hope we can answer every question, but if we run out of time, we can chase up these questions with speakers and panelists after the event. I'd like to thank our sponsors, without whom this event would not be possible: Reconomy, Biffa, Smart Solutions, the Chartered Institution of Waste Management, and Tandem Metallurgical Group. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker. Daryl Dixon is Director of Strategy at the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority, and has a key role in examining the threat of forced labour across all industries and pinpointing what regulation can do. So Daryl, over to you.
Corinne, thank you. I'll just start the video. I will switch to sharing a PowerPoint presentation in a moment. But firstly, thank you for inviting me to speak today to people, representatives from the recycling industry. What I'm going to explain is a little bit of background about the GLEA, excuse me, and perhaps a little bit about the future as well, if any of you have heard about the proposals for a single enforcement body and what that might mean. And I'll explain some of the things that we've done with certain industries that have been identified as high risk, and then on to what we know about the recycling industry and current positions. And one of the key things to say at the top of the presentation is that whilst recycling might not be, in terms of volumes of referrals, a high risk industry that we see in terms of referrals to us, that does not mean to say that it is not one of the high risks. It is simply that we perhaps have not yet got the level of information that we need where there are instances. And one of the key things, therefore, which I'll be talking about, is raising awareness so that people know what to spot and what to report to us. So I'll just now start the presentation. Bear with me a moment. Hopefully you'll see that, get that moving. Right, okay, so hopefully you can see that okay. So as I said, I'm going to briefly talk to you and give you a little background about the role of the organisation, and then move through to what we've done with industry and why, and then on to recycling industry itself and what we know. So the Gangmasters Labour Abuse Authority, as we're now known, was established in 2005, and at that point it was known as the Gangmasters Licensing Authority, and it was established after the Morecambe Bay tragedy, in which 23 Chinese cockle pickers lost their lives. The Gangmasters Licensing Act of 2004, which established us and which was amended to create the new organisation in 2016, was a private members bill. It was brought in by Jim Sheridan, and like many private members bills, it would not have seen the light of day had it not been for the tragedy and the fact that government then looked for a vehicle to support greater regulation, which was limited to the agricultural, shellfish and related processing and packaging activities, and to enable us to license them. Now, at the time that the government supported that, TUC, for example, argued that that scheme should be rolled out to all low-paid, low-skilled work where there was a likelihood of exploitative work occurring. The government position was that there was only evidence of exploitation in the agriculture and shellfish sectors, and therefore it was limited to that area. And so from the time that we were established in 2006, we only licensed that area, and we did introduce what are called our licensing standards. And they are based on the ILO's, the International Labour Organisation's forced labour standards, as well as all UK legislation that applies to the worker and the employer relationship with government. So we have a power, we had a responsibility from 2006 in those sectors to create a compliance framework, the licensing scheme, as well as investigate those businesses that were non-compliant in terms of not coming forward for licensing, where we could investigate and prosecute them. Changes in the labour market and enforcement landscape led to the changes that were introduced in the Immigration Act of 2016. And what that did was created the Office of the Director of Labour Market Enforcement, who has oversight over ourselves, the Employment Agency Standards Team within the Business and Energy Department, and also the National Minimum Wage Team. It changed our name to the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority, and it widened our powers to investigate any labour market offence in England and Wales using police powers given to us under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, and that includes our ability to get warrants for search and seizure, as well as independently conduct arrest. And one of the key things, though, is that we, even though we have that wider remit, recognise that we couldn't police in that term the labour market alone, and need the support of industry and to raise the awareness of industry and get them to assist in prevention of the potential for labour exploitation. So as part of our work, apart from the licensing and apart from the wider responsibility to investigate forced labour allegations that come to us, we have a process where we're looking at engaging, educating and trying to increase due diligence by businesses to prevent exploitation in businesses and in their supply chains. And that's particularly important in support as well of the Transparency Supply Chains Modern Slavery Statement, which was part of the Modern Slavery Act of 2015 for any business with a turnover of £36 million. An interesting point on this is that, of course, you could make any statement at the moment, and as long as you've made a statement, you've met the legal requirement. I'll give you an illustration of how this is still an area that needs to be developed. In a conversation with the chief executive of a large organisation, I talked to him and challenged him about the modern slavery statement of his organisation. It said, the nature of the business we're in is low risk and therefore we don't need to do anything. And I said to him, we were in the City of London area, bearing in mind that your business in the banking sector owns this large this building, and therefore subcontracts out the security, the cleaning and the catering. Do you think your slavery statement has considered the risks of exploitation of low-paid, low-skilled workers that are being introduced by temporary labour agencies through to the companies that have got the contracts with you? And he admitted that they'd never thought of it. And that's the point. You need to think more widely than just sometimes narrowly your own business sector, but also those business sectors and activities that support what you do to enable you to achieve your own business objective. So, as I've said, we recognise we couldn't do everything on our own. We did need support from other industries to understand forced labour and to therefore report it. Bearing in mind the work we did with licensing meant that we operated in the food sector. The first industry agreement that we signed was with the supermarkets and their supply chains, and that was accompanied by a good practice guide to explain to that industry what sort of things to check for, to look out for, to spot and to report, so that they could be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. We also produce other guidance for industry over time, and I'll come back to this particularly. The GLEA Spotting the Science Guide. This is a guide that we produce to raise awareness of forced labour, the types of control that can be exercised by exploiters that are controlling workers through forced labour situations. And this was based on the ILO's forced labour indicators, again, like a section of our licensing standards. But it's important to say that in fact this was QA'd for us by the ILO, who we work with quite closely, and they recognised it as a reliable guide to educate people on what to spot to assist in understanding how forced labour can occur. Since then, what we've done as our experience and as our responsibilities expand over other business sectors, we've now produced a set of business profiles, and they are on our website. And there's a link, excuse me, there that takes you through to the section of the website that covers all those areas. And I will come on in a couple of slides to some of the information we've got on there, particularly in relation to what we know about the recycling industry. Our second protocol was with the construction industry. Third, with textiles, particularly with a lot of issues that have occurred in the Leicester area that you may have seen in the press. And the fourth is with the hospitality and hotel industries. Now, these are protocols to get them to assist in broadening the awareness of forced labour, broadening the awareness of our role, and also what to spot and report to us. And the reason why these sectors have been chosen is because they are sectors that are considered high risk of low paid, low skilled work, but also sectors where we are getting a lot of information coming into us of instances of potential forced labour. Okay, and what I've said a few moments ago is that, of course, in other sectors, it may look as though there isn't any or not much, but of course it may be that it's a case of not having the stones lifted to see what's underneath it. And the more we do that, the more we're aware of what to look for, the more likely it is that we should receive and see the extent of the problem and get better quality information on which we can actually act. But as I say, working with industry is key to us so that we can improve that knowledge and understanding and improve the information and the quality of it that comes to us, which in turn will increase those cases that are assessed as requiring investigation, priority cases, and that therefore can lead on to prosecution. But it is a point, as I think I mentioned earlier, and Corinne's mentioned, quite a lot of the workers we talk about are workers provided by temporary agencies or through individual intermediaries who may be providing those workers to different sectors on different days. And that model of employment, if you like, can therefore be a non-compliant model that is the root of the problem rather than a specific industry itself, and that's something to bear in mind. I've mentioned what we do with protocols. In other areas, we've taken a slightly different approach, and that one of those is in relation to the car wash industry, where there's a lot of concerns over non-compliance, and that non-compliance may not just be the treatment of workers or health and safety, but it might be individuals' complaints about the environment because of effluents and being contaminating other water streams, etc., or people concerned about how their property might be damaged by acidic use on those cars. And so the work we've done with the car wash industry is to try and raise consumer awareness of the different types of levers that might make consumers change where they go to wash their car or how they wash their car, and again what to spot and what to report. And we are in the process at the moment of a pilot looking at that in several local authority areas around London, to looking at an industry accreditation scheme which is backed by a code of practice. And one of the things I want to draw out on this code of practice, which is might be something that you want to think about, is that although we have wider powers to investigate forced labour across England and Wales, they are criminal investigative powers. In the agricultural sector that we license, we also have a civil power of inspection, which gives us a right of entry to premises. We don't have that. We don't have that civil inspection right of entry to check on compliance, what a business is like, in any other industry sector, and only do we have the right of access under our criminal powers where it's past the threshold that we feel there is specific and high risk criminal activities going on. The code of practice is quite interesting then, in that where it was developed with the industry sectors on what a car wash needs to do, leading to an accreditation process, included within it a clause that if a business is accredited, part of that accreditation agreement is that it agrees that it can be inspected as part of the accreditation by auditors, but also by the GLA on almost a civil inspection process. So that's something that we try and get in an extra power through that code of practice, where we don't have that power at the moment. Now, that is something that may change in the future because of the agreement recently published by the government on the 8th of June, which you can find on the government website by using the search criteria single enforcement body, about the development of an organisation still known as the single enforcement body, which will bring together the GLEA, the Employment Agency Standards, and the National Minimum Wage Team into one organisation. It'll be a couple of years before that occurs because there's quite a lot of legislation to produce before we get there, but nonetheless that is the objective now of government. In that report, though, it did talk about licensing of other sectors, and I've included a quote here which I think is quite important to draw on and think about, and that is that tackling non-compliance across multiple sectors is complex. It's clear from the responses that applying a blanket approach comes with the risks of not addressing the specific risks within each sector. It's very clear, therefore, that we need to understand better how different sectors operate to see whether they are similar or where the differences are, and in those differences, where it's likely that exploitation of workers can infiltrate that business sector. We need to understand the full range of issues in each sector to better understand the threat of exploitation and determine the right approach. So that means as well that as we go forward, the right approach may not be to license new sectors. It may be to look at other ways of accreditation and support from industry and codes of practice. And it may be to look at the protocols that we've developed so far. And it may be other models, industry-led, where we may come and support, but not lead as we have done on these others. And that's something, again, that we are keen to see and support as much as we can. And as it goes on to say here, and this is quite interesting, that of those respondents that disagreed with the proposed expansion of licensing, some cited voluntary industry-led schemes that are already in place, as mentioned, the car wash, where a code of practice has been developed to set the standards and suggested evaluation of them to determine whether a regulatory approach is required. So that code of practice is quite a key document trying to leverage control over industry operators. And of course, as we'll always appreciate, and as this occurs in the licensing sector as well, not all businesses want to be licensed or accredited, but of course, those that don't may well be the ones that don't want to because they're trying to stay out of the light because of the way that they operate leads to greater exploitation of workers and breaches of other regulatory responsibilities. So certainly those that come into the light, we're able to control them better and understand how they operate and draw and build up their compliance. And that also will assist us using our resources more effectively on those that don't come forward to be assessed and where more serious breaches may be arising. So moving to recycling sector itself, in this slide, you can see what we know so far. There's a picture of the UK, and you can see that where we've identified cases involving recycling is not just one sector of the country. There are gaps that suggest that maybe nothing's happening. Actually, the reality may be that things are happening, we just haven't been told about them, and that's a key thing that we need to bear in mind. In the assessment of the highest risk sectors that we come across from all of the cases that we investigate, and indeed from the information that is assessed by the Office of Director of Labour Market Enforcement, that the recycling sector doesn't even feature in the top 12. Now, that doesn't mean to say, as I said, that there isn't extreme modern slavery problems. It's just that we don't know about the extent of them, and the level of them doesn't rank it higher than those other industries where we are seeing those problems. But as Corinne has already mentioned, referring to Operation Fort, in that case, the workers were temporary workers provided by an employment agency that had been infiltrated, and where the workers were provided to different industries on different days. So as I said earlier, it's not necessarily that the recycling industry as itself is a major problem, but sometimes it's how you get your workers, where you get your workers from, and how they're treated that's the problem. And the next day they may be working in another industry. And it's important to know as much as you can about how they were recruited and what their treatment is that can assist us in eradicating this problem from any industry that it occurs in. In 2020 through 2021, there were 22 referrals that led to investigations from the information we received. And as I mentioned, and you'll see in the slide on the map and on the table, there's a spread of where those cases were found. There was nothing to say it was just a purely isolated area. It could occur anywhere in the country. When we look at the outcome of those cases, this is obviously where we say, this information doesn't necessarily mean there wasn't a problem. But of the 22 that looked as though they would be appropriate for investigation, only 8 eventually were passed to our operations teams themselves to investigate. 3 referred to other government departments, enforcement teams. That could be the Environment Agency, it could be the National Minimum Wage teams, it could be any of our colleagues in any other department where we felt there was a risk. So if you've got workers that might be on benefits, that could have gone to DWP as well. So you'd appreciate, based on the allegation, if it wasn't something that fell within our remit, we would then, when we got more information from what investigation we did do, we would pass it on. As you'll see as well, and this is the key point we'll come to again, 10 cases, although they looked like they were appropriate for investigation, no further action was taken. There was only intelligence gleaned from it, and it wasn't of a high quality that allowed us to do anything operational on that case. In other words, we would retain the information and we would hope that we would receive other information in due course that might enhance that information such that it was sufficient to enable an effective investigation and identify perpetrators of forced labour. One case, there was an informal resolution with the agency supplying the workers, so that was more with the temporary agency than it was with the recycling site itself. Of those 8 that went for the investigation, when we investigated, there were 5 where there were no offences that were appropriate to our role, and therefore again they were also passed on to the other agencies, as in terms of the first 3 above, and then there were further 3 where there was just insufficient evidence to suggest that there was any problems. So you'll appreciate there's a difficulty, and what we can see is low levels of cases being referred to us, and of course within those low levels, when you separate out and assess the sort of cases you've got in the information, there's a low level that are actually reaching a threshold for investigation, use of our powers, and potentially proof of offences and ultimately prosecution. But there are cases coming up in these sectors and different sectors that we haven't dealt with prior to the expansion of our powers, and we're evolving our knowledge and the number of cases we are dealing with that are leading up to higher sanctions all the time. We've got operations going on today in relation to car washes in part of the country where we may be arresting. We've arrested people that before that have been perpetrating, if you like, domestic servitude, allowing people to live in sheds and in their houses. And so as we get more referrals and the better quality information, the more likely we are to be able to mount effective investigations into these cases. So what do we know? A lot of the information that we find broadly matches what we find in other sectors, and so too does the information we suggest in relation to our business profiles, which I'll touch on in a moment in another slide. As you'll appreciate there, we give an indication of the likely nationality of the workers, and quite frequently the workers we find exploited in this sector, but in other sectors, is higher from the Romanian community, predominantly male, and in this sector between 36 and 45. Now, quite often in our assessment, we find that the most frequently exploited male worker is Romanian and between 25 to 35, and the most frequent exploiter is Romanian male between 35 and 45. So you will always find quite frequently, and other organisations report this, that exploitation occurs within communities, within nationality groups, where those more established individuals from that community may then be the ones that lead and control others as they've established themselves and understand better how businesses operate and where they can supply labour to. Of those cases we've dealt with, of those that we've had intelligence on, even where we've not been able to investigate it, there is an analysis and a breakdown of the type of company where there may be a greater likelihood of exploitation, as you'll see in the slide in the top on the right. If you look down to the bottom of that slide, those slides, the two boxes at the bottom, you'll see that quite a lot of the information we receive relates to workers not receiving the national minimum wage, and some in relation to their accommodation, which will not necessarily be at the recycling site or elsewhere. Where we receive information which is purely about national minimum wage and not associated with any other indicators of exploitation or offences we can investigate, we will pass that to the national minimum wage teams. As you'll see from the slide, the box on the right bottom, we haven't received any cases where the allegations would equate to what we would see as modern slavery at this point in time. But there were clearly other non-compliances and alleged to be deliberate, which would warrant other regulatory interventions. What I would like to point out, though, is the absence of modern slavery in an allegation doesn't mean to say that we won't find things which are precursors for modern slavery. In other words, if they're not spotted and if they're not dealt with, whether that's by us or by another organisation, the organisation, the individual that has committed those regulatory breaches will think they can get away with more. They will take more risks and there will be greater exploitation coming into the system. And as I said, and we reiterate throughout this, as in Operation Fort, the temporary worker model was where the risks to those workers was first identified. And certainly from some of the work from our colleagues have said that in terms of the key health and safety risks, not only do we find in this and in other sectors that workers don't have the right PPE equipment, but on illegal waste sites, their concerns are regard to hazardous materials not being properly disposed of, which of course is not just a risk to the workers, but a risk to the environment as well. We put on our website guidance on our business profiles, which talks about our intelligence gaps, what we know, what sort of things to look out for, and what to spot. This slide summarises it. On this slide and the next two slides, there is a hyperlink at the bottom, and I'm assuming that colleagues who are organising the event will circulate the presentation afterwards, but you can certainly find this information on our website. We often find, as I've mentioned, that workers are recruited through friends, through other agencies. They are transported probably by, and their transport to the UK and their accommodation is frequently, in this sector and in others really, it's a general trend, are often overcrowded, unsanitary, unsafe in terms of the transport, and there are charges for the transport and accommodation, where if the workers are not paid the national minimum wage as well, they can very soon find themselves in a bonded labour situation. And I've mentioned a moment ago about the PPE issue. We want people in the industry, when they think about their requirements under the Transparency in Supply Chain Modern Slavery requirement, and those that aren't caught by that threshold of 36 million, to think about these things, to actually enable them to consider the due diligence we actually want them to do. It's a set of questions. How do you ensure your workers know how much they should be paid? What information are you giving them about their legal rights to national minimum wage? What do you do to check that they are not being exploited? Do you translate information for them? Do you check whether they're all being introduced by the same person? Are they living together? If you've used auditors or yourself, what is your knowledge of how to spot the signs of modern slavery? What do you do if you find that modern slavery? How do you deal with complaints from workers? Some things you may just discount, but actually when you start to receive a number of similar complaints from workers, there's a pattern. What do you do when you see that pattern, and who do you report it to? And we particularly ask recruiters to do this in other areas, and that is when workers come forward, ask them if they've been introduced by anybody else, if they've been paying any work finding fees, or feel they're exploited, or have paid any fees for anything else in any other way. These are the things that we want you to consider when you're reporting cases to us. An example is given at the top there that you can see, and we ask what might assist the GAA, and it's about providing information such as what language do they speak, what nationality are they, are there minors working, are the workers predominantly male or female, what other indicators of control are they controlled and all arrive at work together in the same transportation, are they housed together, are they in good health, do they look malnourished? These are the sort of things that will help us to build a picture and identify the severity of risk that we need to address. We, as I've mentioned in an earlier slide, produce a guide spotting the signs. It explains what forced labour is, how debt bondage can occur, restricted freedom where workers are tied to a particular piece of accommodation, watching their behaviour where, for example, they may be introduced to working in a recycling site and they may be working alongside the person who's actually controlling them. And that person may control their accommodation. And in terms of finances, as we found in a number of cases, workers can be introduced through employment agencies where the employment agencies don't understand, as in Operation Fort, that they've been infiltrated, and the employment agency and the recycling centre may pay the right legal minimum wage to the worker, they think, but they may be paying it to the bank account of somebody that is using the account to control all of the workers. In other words, if there's 5 workers, there may only be 1 bank account. And it's important that you check that the wage you're paying is going to the worker who worked, not the bank account of another individual at all. And so in summary, it's important that you are aware of the risks of modern slavery, you understand how it can occur and what things to report to us, and that you do that so that we can work together to reduce the risk of exploitation in the recycling centre, as well as understand better the extent of it and how great a risk it may well be. This is a slide from our website. It's my last slide, and that summarises the information, the contacts to us to let us know about any concerns you may have with regard to workers on recycling centres and how they may be recruited and supplied to your business. I hope that helps. And the key thing, please, to take away from this is to be aware of the risks of modern slavery, how it can occur, and what we need to know, and to report it to us and to our colleagues in other enforcement agencies and the National Crime Agency. And where we've got cases that may involve organised criminal groups operating as in Operation Fort, then clearly our role works closely in support of the local police and the National Crime Agency as well. Thank you for your attention, and I'll just close this PowerPoint. Corinne, over to you.
There we go. Thank you very much indeed, Daryl. That's extremely interesting to hear the point of view from the regulator. We do actually have a couple of minutes just for a couple of questions. We've had some questions in, but some things we have to pick up at the Q&A session at the end of the day. But also we will make sure that all questions are logged, and if we can't answer them today, we'll get through to we'll get through by email. But Daryl, if I'd just like to quickly come back on, we had a question, and this is something we're going to pick up in the panel session as well, but interesting to hear from the regulator's point of view. What is the GLAA doing in the waste sector specifically? Are there any plans to develop protocols similar to construction for this sector? Or as you said, for sectors which aren't sort of part of statutory legislation, but you have sort of like an agreement with an industry? The code of practice I thought was very interesting. You said that with the car wash sector.
Yes, I mean, I think, one of the things is resourcing, and certainly in the work that we did with the construction industry, it became quite resource intensive, and it's quite resource intensive to set up the protocol, but then it's about maintaining it, because what you don't want to do is just create a document that a lot of organisations sign and do nothing with. So that's the difficulty, for us at the moment. And so with limited resources in the organisation, there's only 126 of us, and there's a very small element of that that are focused purely on prevention work, working with industry. So we have to try and look at how we can develop force multipliers by getting the industry itself to proactively look at how we can develop these things. We can assist And obviously where we've put our resources, it's been those cases where we've seen the highest risk and had the highest level of high priority cases. And that's how we have to operate. So where we are with the recycling industry is we've had contact from a range of people. I know that the electrical recycling, with the colleagues there that I spoke to a couple of years ago, there was some work started to look at a similar type of code of practice for the industry, a hybrid of a protocol, so there's an understanding of how to liaise with ourselves and other colleagues in enforcement, with a code of practice for the industry, and potentially with that access and almost granting of a power of entry if you are a supporter of the protocol stroke code of practice, is something that would work and help us. And we can try and help and support that and give the examples we've already developed to industry groups for that purpose. So it's just a matter of us managing our resources to do that, but trying to use what we've done before as a good illustration of how I think other industries can develop and support us.
That's excellent. Well, as we actually will be hearing in the next panel session, there may be some really good connections you can actually make today about such a kind of practice. So that's great. So we have to end this session there for a quick break, but we're back at 10:45 with the panel session. And as I said, any questions we'll pick up later in the day as well. So hang on for more, and see you soon.
Thank you, Corin.
Thank you. Thanks, Darren. There we go. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you once again to Daryl for giving us the view from the regulator. We now have a panel session to see what the industry's view is and response has been so far to the threat of modern slavery. So let me introduce Susan Bannister, who is Head of the Business Development at the Slave Free Alliance, Katie Coburn, Professional Services Director of the Chartered Institution of Waste Management, and Diane Crowe, Head of Group Sustainability at Reconomy. Hello all, thank you so much for coming along and taking part in this session. So can I start with Susan first? We've heard a lot about Operation Ford. Can you tell us more about other forced labour cases around the country that involve the waste sector? I know you've been telling me that just this year, in fact, there's been something you've been working on. Obviously, you can't tell us full details, but whatever you can tell us would be really, really useful, I think.
Thanks, Corinne. Yes, so we have been involved in cases this year. So this is an issue that isn't going away from the sector. And there are similarities to Operation Fort in these cases where the victims are non-English victims. They are being trafficked by organised crime groups, and I think that's important for people to know. And they are still targeting the easier route into the sector via labour providers. I think what we need to do really with businesses is to raise the awareness, to keep talking about it, to not think that this is a situation that's been dealt with. We're still seeing signs not being spotted, and the thing to realise as well is that victims don't self-identify, so that makes it a lot harder for us. They may know that they're not being paid national minimum wage, but they may think that's okay, and they do get a bit of Stockholm syndrome, so it does make it difficult for businesses. And also some businesses don't make it clear what the avenues to raise concerns are, so that's something that businesses can put in place. The case that we had actually this year was picked up very quickly because the organisation involved had been trained. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I would definitely say to businesses, make sure that you train everybody.
Absolutely. Just another quick follow-up for that. We heard from Daryl that just because the waste sector sort of ranks quite lowly on their sort of on their radar, that's only because they don't know that they haven't got enough information in. And if you lift up the stone, then you will no doubt find more. And I presume that's a message you very much want to get out there as well.
Definitely. I actually do think, I mean, it's great that Daryl's got statistics like that. One of the things that we do struggle with is getting good data. And even if you look at the statistics for 2021 compared to 2022 for the National Referral Mechanism, which is like the state-sponsored support system for victims of modern slavery, it looks slightly lower than the 2020 figures. So you could turn around and say, oh, well, does this mean that we're getting better at thwarting this is an issue? But I think it's more complicated than that. I think it could be that we are getting better, but it also could be that COVID made it harder to report. There were fewer organisations to report to because a lot of them actually shut down in lockdown. So I suppose we'll have to see this year as to where that goes. We still would say that waste and recycling is a high-risk sector just due to the certain nature of certain jobs. So where you've got lower paid labour-intensive work, such as in the MRFs, you still have a risk attached to that. But that's not to say that it's just the MRFs. There's other areas in the process, such as collection, as Daryl's findings just showed there, skip high came up quite high, but also export. There are different sections where we find it.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Diane, if I can come to you, I'm very interested. Sort of, does he describe your experiences covering how you really first heard about this issue in the first place in the waste sector, and how Reconomy has responded from this well, it's still a new and emerging threat.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Yeah, I mean, I think Reconomy are in a unique position in that we, between a really wide section of customers across all different sectors, and and over 1,000 sort of suppliers across the UK. So our aim really is to try and use that position and that influence across the industry with our suppliers. And to raise that awareness, to promote the fact that get people trained, get people spotting the signs, and make sure that your organisation doesn't become exploited by, as Susan said, organised crime.
Mm-hmm.
I've certainly noticed, and I've been with Reconomy coming up for 3 years now, and I've certainly noticed in that time a real increase in the interest from customers, as I say, on a wide sector, from retail, construction, hospitality, across all sectors, a real increase in interest and that sustained as well. So it's not just necessarily from new customers, that's from our existing customer base as well. And it is that sort of moral and legal responsibility. So even though we work with, sort of over 80% of our supply chain are SMEs, so they wouldn't necessarily come in under the legal requirement to have a modern slavery statement, there's still very much that responsibility throughout the supply chain, with customers, through us, through to all our suppliers, and then for them to look down their supply chain. We all have that responsibility to raise awareness, to look at what we can do as organisations to make sure that our people are trained and we are able to spot those signs. And for me, it's about having a risk assessment process in place. So as we've heard, you might think that your business is low risk, but you're still going to be, you're still probably going to have catering, cleaning. There are other industries that you will be employing outside of the waste sector, but then looking very much at home as to what your practices are around recruitment, how you're getting people into work with you.
Thanks, Dan. And I'll come back to ask about this this meeting with the suppliers that we spoke about earlier. So I'll come back to you on that one. Just want to get to Katie next. Now we heard from Daryl there about codes of conduct, protocols with sectors that aren't regulated under statute, and I know that CRWM and the Environmental Services Association have been collaborating closely on developing code of conduct and protocols. And please tell us what's the latest, what's been going on.
Will do. Thanks, Corinne. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that every speaker so far has mentioned the importance of raising awareness on this topic. I mean, it's absolutely crucial for a successful and flourishing society, for those with a platform and those with a voice, to speak up for those vulnerable people who don't have that platform and that voice. And CRWM, as a leading professional body for the sector, and the Environmental Services Association as the sort of a leading trade association, really recognise the sort of increasing and growing threat that modern day slavery has for our sector, being targeted by those people who are involved in illegal activities such as those. So I'm really pleased to be able to share today news that the ESA and CRWM have recently signed up to a joint commitment relating to modern day slavery. That commitment covers sort of 5 key areas. The first is that we will look to ensure compliance with the Modern Day Slavery Act 2015, both in our own operations and our supply chains, but also within our codes of conduct. So for the Environmental Services Association, there's been an update to their code of conduct. For CRWM, there's a CRWM group policy statement, and we'll look at how we also link that into our codes of conduct for membership. that's a good link into that work that Daryl was pointing to, and it's a first step. So certainly moving into the second point, we're also really keen to collaborate with charities and with other sector bodies, with experts on how we can raise awareness and share best practice for identifying, rooting out and stamping out modern day slavery. The third point in that commitment is that we will share intelligence with other organisations and with regulators where we do see cases arising, so that we can stamp those out. The fourth is about working together to provide guidance and signposting for support to help members, and certainly we'd be looking to work with Daryl and with the other organisations here today to do that. And the fifth is to work together to assess what training is needed for the sector to ensure that we understand how to identify, how to report, how to prevent modern slavery.
And as we heard from Daryl, that some sectors have actually sort of volunteered to be regulated, volunteered for inspections. Can you see a similar sort of protocol being developed with the waste sector?
I certainly think it's interesting. I think it sounds like a really sound regulatory technique, and I think it's something that I would be really keen to have a conversation with Daryl about, and I'm sure Jacob at the ESA would be equally keen to explore that further.
That's excellent news. That's excellent. Susan, I'll get back to you. It's interesting for me here, sort of, to get a bit more of a grip about what kind of facilities are involved where exploitation does take place. Because I've heard about scrapyards, materials recovery facilities, kind of those sort of places. Are these the kind of the typical sites that we see?
Yeah, I think it's anywhere where there is lower paid roles, really, where they're hard to fill roles generally. And there are quite a few across this sector, so that's why it does pose a risk.
And so, what's your personal view about how the waste sector has responded? Because you've been involved from very early on, and dealing not only directly with waste management companies, but also it's been an increasing number of industry meetings, sort of the indirect procurement human rights group, which retailers have set up, and which also Diane is involved with. What's been your view about how that's meetings and coordination has been shaped over the past few years?
I have to say that I think that the waste and recycling sector have been very grown up about it, and you're right, both Diane and myself were involved in the indirect procurement human rights group, and they've set up a waste and recycling working group. One of the things that we're looking at the moment is doing a risk assessment, help supporting businesses to risk assess in this sector and where those risks are. We've also got a group that we run jointly with the ESA as well, for the waste and recycling sector. And again, that's looking at best practice and any areas of concern that we want to collaborate on, and anybody in this sector can join that. They don't have to be a member of the ESA or the SFA to join and be a part of that. And the idea is we're just going to share the information as much as possible. We found that the bigger organisations in this sector have been quite responsible. As you know, some of them have found victims in their businesses and have responded really well. What we now need to do is to filter that knowledge to the smaller businesses. And I think there's a misconception that Section 54 applies to any business with a turnover of £36 million or more to report on modern slavery. But what people don't necessarily understand is that the Modern Slavery Act applies to all businesses. It doesn't matter if you're a one-man band, that act still applies to you. So everybody should be, should do their own due diligence and training in relation to that.
That's great. Thanks. Diane, if I can get back to you. Now, we spoke before today about this day you met with about 50 suppliers. Is that right? Received training from Hope for Justice, which I've mentioned before, and also which Slave Free Alliance sort of is an offshoot from. We're interested in that. How did that get set up? How did they go? And what kind of lessons were learned?
Yeah, no, we had a couple of years ago, we did a supplier forum, which again, Hope for Justice supported us on, and there was training there for the suppliers that joined. That was obviously a face-to-face event in those times, and obviously we'd like to have done something last year, but we're really keen to just to continue to raise that awareness really with our supply chain. So we felt it was, the timing was right, and it was a good opportunity to put on a webinar. So we had a webinar, well attended, with our suppliers, like you say, around 50 or so suppliers. And Hope for Justice, again, raising that awareness, talking to organisations about how to spot the signs, where resources are available, what the current thinking is in terms of the overall industry, and what the issues are. That was a really informative session. And then we just talked a bit about what Reconomy are doing, how we're responding. But the main thing that I wanted to get across was all the over that period of a couple of years, all the resources that are there now through the likes of the Modern Slavery Helpline, Unseen, Hope for Justice, obviously, Stronger Together, and we're Reconomy are partners with the Supply Chain Sustainability School, and they have a raft of freely available modern slavery training, from basic sort of a couple of minutes videos through to an hour or so of full training. So you can access that at any level really. And that's free to use. So just sort of promoting that, where people can get resources from, how to do risk assessments, where to get the training, putting posters up in different languages, that sort of thing. And we're really pleased with the feedback. The feedback was that people felt it was relevant and needed and necessary. And I think what did surprise me slightly was some of the feedback was that people hadn't appreciated that this was an issue in the waste industry, which did surprise me. So I think doubly needed and necessary that we're having this session today, really, just to keep getting that message out there.
I think it's interesting you say that. I suppose I found it surprising when I first started reporting on this that there was quite a lot of pushback and a suspicion, I suppose, that a journalist was asking these potentially difficult questions. And I think a lot of organisations are worried about their personal reputations and that sort of thing. So did you get that kind of pushback, that kind of feeling that this is too much of a sensitive area and we don't really want to look too much into it? You see what I mean?
I didn't get that impression from the feedback. Obviously it's slightly more difficult because it's like this, so you're not having those informal kind of conversations, but when we was more like this a few years ago, as I say, we did have people in the room openly putting their hands up and say, we've got this issue, we're not sure, could this be, which I was a little bit surprised about, and I thought, well, that's great, that's really, really open. But I think there probably is still that bit of stigma around it, and feeling that they've perhaps done something wrong to encourage it, or they're going to be liable themselves. But as we've tried to get across, it is about organised crime. It is about these people trying to stay one step ahead of the industry and of legislation and of the regulators. But about making your business, making sure that your business can't be exploited, so that you have got, the burglar alarm on, sort of thing. It's, the windows are shut. It's make it very difficult for those people to get into your organisation and push it out.
And as I mentioned earlier on, meeting with a seminar with included Theresa May, who was very much behind the Modern Slavery Act. That she urged all companies to check their supply chains. I mean, do you foresee a time where actually that's going to be not just a pressure from just business in general, but this will be just part of a natural safeguarding measures that everybody with a supply chain will need to do, that take such due diligence, basically?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. As we, as Darryl was saying earlier, you had the Modern Slavery Act, and you've got to have a statement, and people could make a pretty wishy-washy statement or none at all, really, and and that was legally compliant, and that's that is being beefed up. So it's more clear what you need to put in your statement. What you've done around modern slavery, what you're intending to do, and some clearer guidance coming out. So I can sort of see, if that is still not becoming effective, and the numbers are still rising, and obviously we've got things like, we have got things like Brexit, which will potentially, exacerbate the situation, because people, I think it's from today actually, isn't it? EU nationals need to have registered that they can legally work here, and if you don't have a right to work, then you might get put under even more pressure, if you want to stay in the UK, to kind of go underground and get potentially involved in these these organisations. Susan said, not necessarily knowing that you are being exploited. So I think if these matters don't, the actions that legally are taken, and the businesses are taking, and looking down the supply chain, if that isn't having the effect that it needs to have, then yes, I can see that becoming even stronger legislation throughout the supply chain.
That's excellent. Thanks, Diane. We've had a question come in, and I think perhaps Katie, this might be one thing you might want to respond to. Are there published lists of qualified trainers to raise awareness for organisations?
There are. The government do publish a whole host of resources that you can access online and free of charge, which give some really good advice and guidance on how to identify, report and deal with modern slavery. I think Diane's mentioned access to additional resources as well. Certainly, as well as part of this ESA CIWM commitment, we'll be looking to promote resources, free of charge resources, as and where we can, for our membership. So I think there's certainly things there. It's now just about highlighting them and raising that awareness again.
Susan, Diane touched there on the latest EU resettlement scheme. The changing nature of employment, and Darryl also mentioned that this is something we need to find out more about, where our sector sources its labour from, because I'm not sure anybody really knows. What's your view on that, and what kind of do you see sort of organisations trying to sort of get more of a grip on not just where their own labour comes from, but where their supply chain labour is sourced from?
I think with doing your due diligence on your labour providers is going to be imperative. I mean, I would actually say with Brexit is, make sure you're doing your own due diligence on your own staff. Don't just assume that everybody's got settled status, because you don't want to be caught out in that situation. And there are solutions, so make sure you speak to a good employment lawyer to work out how you can best support workers. But I think for me, with regards to, and I'm sure we'll hear from Biffa and Smart Solutions, I think transparency and openness is key. And I would say that's not just with your suppliers, but also with your customers and other experts out there, such as Slavery Alliance and other organisations. I think the only way we're going to really tackle it and find out what's going on is to be working together and sharing information and being honest with each other, because at the end of the day, it's the criminal who's at fault here. They are the ones who are breaking the law. We're just trying to muddle through, and if we can muddle through together, I think we'll be more effective. And one of the most simple things that businesses can do is walk the floor and talk to your staff, find out where they're from, ask the questions. We always describe it as finding out they're not normal. For example, victims won't do things at the weekend because they are generally just kept in the house and, you know, encouraged not to leave. They don't know where they are sometimes. I remember interviewing a victim who had been in Birmingham for 6 months and had no idea where he was. He was brought straight over from Poland and was placed into Birmingham, had no idea where he was. So you're looking for the not normal, I think. And I think that's, you know, especially going forward with Brexit, you know, just make sure you're doing the basic checks.
And also, I wanted to ask really where, because obviously there's a number of legal threats really to businesses as well. Because I've seen that some victims have grouped together to launch a legal action after their ordeal. We don't really know the status of that, or whether that's going to how much of a threat that might be, and with the chances of perhaps more legislation coming in. I mean, there's really an awful lot. As I said before, this is a very well regulated sector. Lots and lots of legal threats all over the place. Do you see enough sort of high quality legal advice really getting to all parts of the waste sector?
I think I would hope that the sector is not going to be scared of it is the legal threats in that sense. I think if you as a sector put the victim first, you won't go far wrong. So if you don't have a good escalation process, if you don't have avenues to report it internally to identify any potential victims, that's where you could come unstuck. So I would, you know, encourage all businesses to look at what would you do if you found a victim. You know, victim first, that's always what we say. And, you know, if you can safeguard that victim and have robust escalation processes, the harm to that victim will be minimized. As I mentioned earlier, the case that we were involved in earlier this year was picked up very quickly compared to, you know, back in 2015. And so the harm there was minimal. And I think that actually will prevent legal cases coming forward. And that's all you can do. And that's all that's expected from you. And under the Business and Human Rights, I forgot what the name is, but from the United Guiding Principles, you know, that they will say, make sure you've got a good grievance procedure for any potential victims.
I put the same question. Oh, sorry. I was having a think of myself now. Sorry, Diane. Can I put the same question to you there about what kind of analysis of the legal obligations and threats you see to well, not just your business but the business you work with?
Sorry, Corinne. What sort of
an analysis of the threat of legal action have you undertaken? Because obviously. You know, this is not just about just our own best practice, but that there is a threat that that companies might be, you know, put under legal action if they don't take the right course on this.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, it is about making that clear to organisations that you've got the moral and legal responsibility, but then you could also have the that issue around claims and compensation claims from potential victims, and as I understand that, you know, there is a bit of an industry building up around that, so that where people have been moved around businesses, that they will, you know, they are potentially going to be, you know, going to be exploited for compensation. So I think it just, you know, it just adds to the whole need to be doing something, to do the right thing, and as we've said, there is plenty of guidance out there to make sure that you do have your ducks in a row, so to speak, in terms of your recruitment process, you know, as we said, grievance processes, risk assessment, you know, that you've done as much as you can as a business to mitigate that risk. And I think, but in terms of sort of, you know, getting legal advice, I think where we are at the moment is really just, you know, there is plenty of advice out there. The law is quite clear, and I think it's just making sure that, again, you've raised that awareness and people understand what their responsibilities are.
Thank you. There's, I suppose, kind of a slightly associated question that we've had through. So this is from an MRW reader who says, one of the key areas for us is how do we ensure we protect ourselves when we engage with a second agency to ensure they have the correct procedures in place? Would you audit? If so, what should you be asking for, and what must an agency have in place to comply with modern slavery rules? Diane, have you got any sort of...
Yeah, I mean, there are, I'm just thinking to the resources on Stronger Together website, for example. There's, lots of questions that are there that you can ask to a recruitment agency around, how people are paid. There's lots of checks that you can do around their banks, addresses. If it's, you could even go round to those places, but really being clear with that recruitment agency and asking them what is your process, and how do you ensure that you're not being exploited, and you're not procuring the modern slavery in effect. So I think, and what we're working with in the groups, the IPHR group and the group that I'm on with Susan, is to make that clear for the waste industry. So we're developing that sort of risk assessment checklist, audit type checklist that we can use with waste across the waste industry, can use with recruitment organisations for first tier and second tier. But really it's asking those deep diving questions, and if you're not sure of the questions to ask, as we said, there is plenty of resource out there. We're looking to prepare that, but in the meantime I would point people towards the Stronger Together resources on their website.
Thank you. And perhaps I can ask pretty much the same question to Katie. What kind of advice would you point people to, and is this something that CIWM and ESA are developing themselves? I mean, there's lots of advice out there, as we've heard from various different sources. It might be confusing for a waste site to sort of know exactly. Should there be like a more centralized system, a sort of kind of professional body have a role in coordinating that, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what part of the commitment that we've signed up to with ESA is really about. It's about us taking those next steps to identify the really good advice that is already available, but then collate that for our industry and make it available to our memberships and the wider sector. So I do think there's a role for us in that. I don't think we're there yet. I think we've taken the right step with signing up to this commitment with ESA, and I'm excited to push that forward and start to make those resources a reality for our membership and the wider sector.
And further on the collaboration with ESA, do you have sort of set targets that you want to reach? Do you have an idea about where you might want to be in a year, 2 years' time?
I don't think we've got as far as that. I think that it's fairly early. We've very hot off the press signed this agreement. It's been in development for a number of months, but we've recently signed, and I'm due to speak to Jake at the ESA later this week about how we take this forward next. We're planning to do a 2-pager in the next issue of Circular magazine, where we can start to talk about our commitment to modern slavery and how we'll be helping members. Of course, we've got access to resources like the Knowledge Centre and CIWM Connect, and we'll be keen to make sure that we use those to promote the work that is being done to raise awareness and to provide those resources to the sector.
That's great. And of course, MRW obviously on hand as well to help put the message out as well. Perfect. That's good for you. I'm looking forward to the press release as well. Excellent. Susan, can I come back to you really? So we've had a question saying, if you want to be part of the waste and recycling groups that we've mentioned, how do you get involved?
Well, you can email me. So my email is very simple, susan.bannister@slavefreealliance.org, and I can add you on. The next meeting we have will be in September. Obviously, we're sort of stopping for the summer break, and just be aware that there's one end in Bannister.
Indeed, yeah. And just further, I just want to sort of, I suppose, perhaps talk a bit more about the indirect procurement human rights group, because people may not know. You know, I've only been to a few meetings myself, but this is really set up by retailers, led by the co-op, but it involves the really sort of. I mean, how many retailers are on it? Do we know?
I don't know that. Diane
few,
may know.
Oh, Diane, yes, perhaps you know.
I'm not sure of exact numbers, but you know, Co-op, Sky, Body Shop, testing me now. But there is a you know, there is a wide range of retailers and a wide range of waste management companies on there as well. So yeah, so Co-op chair it and lead it. But it's, you know, it has so far it's been a, you know, an effective group, and we're getting starting to get some really good outputs, which will. I think our aim is for the anti-slavery week coming up in October. Our aim is to get everything out and ready for that. So,
indeed, yes, I'm looking forward to that. Yes, so I mean, this is really sort of part of the message I want to get across to viewers of this conference, that these retailers really are taking a really close scrutiny, and it may be that you will not get the contracts you want unless you can demonstrate certain good practices and safeguards. And this seems to be where we're going, not through legislation, but through businesses themselves demanding that this happens.
I think the other thing to note is it's not just going to be businesses going forward either. The amendments to the Modern Slavery Act have now brought public sector bodies into Section 54. So if you're wanting to get business from any councils or other public sector organisations, they will be asking more detailed questions on modern slavery.
Right. I think a qualification on one of the questions. I think it was the question qualified training was about if there are lists of recommended organisations to go to who do training for companies in the sector. So I suppose yes. So we have including the Slave Free Alliance, but there are other organisations out there, of course, that do so. But I suppose is there any way of those being accredited, or could anybody set up as an advisory company? I suppose. Susan, perhaps that's something for you. What kind of qualifications do you need to?
Well, we are just becoming accredited as trainers, but I think if you're taking training from anybody, I would be, you'd be wanting to take training from people who know what they're doing, that they've got a history in managing modern slavery in some form or other.
Sure thing. And I suppose it is actually very much an emerging market, isn't it? I suppose, really, in many ways. Because Hope for Justice was working with Operation Fort back in 2015, and the Slave Free Alliance came out of that. But others do, as you mentioned, Stronger Together. But yes, I think it's something to maybe to keep an eye on, and perhaps CWM will sort of eventually produce more sort of helpful material about guidance about where people can go on that. I think we're sort of more or less coming to the end of this session. Is there perhaps if I can ask the panel in general, what kind of what's been missed off this discussion so far? Are there any sort of burning issues that anybody wants to get out there, or is that putting you too much on the spot?
I guess my burning issue for a long time was the escalation process was missing in most businesses. Businesses, the ones that did know about the issue had trained staff, they'd got a strategy. But actually, when you said, well, what would you do if you found a victim? That was the question that stumped most people. And actually, that's the most important question, because you've got a vulnerable person in front of you. You want to make sure as a business you have a process that is robust and doesn't just rely on single named people in the organisation to protect that particular victim.
Okay, and there we go. And we must draw that to an end. Thank you so much indeed. I think it's been really interesting to hear what the industry has been doing, and we have to take a 5-minute break, and afterwards we will hear even more in much more detail from Biffa and Smart Solutions, who have been really at the leading edge of tackling modern day slavery. So see you all again in about 5 minutes. Thank you very much, and thank you to all. Hello and welcome back. Next up, we hear from two companies that have done more than most in rooting out modern slavery, and they have invaluable experience to share. This builds up from an RWM session which held in 2019. Let me introduce Melanie Flogdell, Divisional HR Director from BIFA, and Matt Spall, Managing Director of Environmental Sport Services Division at Smart Solutions. Now I'm going to hand over to them, and hopefully there'll be a bit of time for a few questions after the presentation. But thank you both for coming along, and I'm very looking forward to this.
Thanks a lot, Corin, and good morning, everyone. Matt and I are going to talk about our partnership approach to tackling modern slavery, and Matt's kindly driving the slides for me. I must apologise. I'm at one of our BIFA sites, and there are a number of trucks coming over the weighbridge, so I do apologise if there's any noise. I will mute when I'm not talking, so sorry about that. Hazards of the job of working in the waste industry. So if we move on to the next slide to talk about our journey and how we've taken responsibility. Cue the truck going by. So we've had a really strong and long-standing relationship with Smart Solutions, our managed service providers, and that's been vital in our journey to root out and tackle modern day slavery. As you've heard today, the waste industry is one of the sectors most impacted by human trafficking, which both BIFA and Smarts found out very early on in our journey. It was back in June 2016 when we were contacted by Hope for Justice regarding a potential victim of modern day slavery working for Smarts at a BIFA site. Criminals had targeted our unwitting labour providers, and we needed to take swift action. So an investigation took place to establish the facts and identify any other potential victims. We worked together closely with Hope for Justice and the West Midlands Police, and a cohesive investigative approach was agreed with Smart Solutions to ensure that all of the named individuals were spoken to in a timely fashion, but in a way so as not to put anybody at any further potential risk or indeed to prejudice the investigation. So we took a risk-based approach to understand any other potential areas of vulnerability within the business and find solutions to prevent any further incidents by identifying and disseminating lessons learned. So some of the things that we did, which you can see in the diagram in front of us, it's something, all of these things are under constant review. But back in October 2016, we made sure that we trained all of our employees on modern day slavery, what it is, how to spot the signs, how to report a concern, and as Susan said, what to do if you do identify a victim or have concerns about someone you think is a potential victim. So all of our employees had training, and what we deemed our high risk areas, which are our material recycling facilities where we have a managed service provided by our labour providers, they had additional training from Hope for Justice, so more in depth. And that was all of our managers, our supervisors, and our HR teams as well. We also had Hope for Justice come to site. We had outreach workers talking to people in the staff rooms, just to raise awareness about modern slavery, but also to identify if there were any other issues. It's also really key to make sure that your materials are available in multilingual leaflets and flyers and documents so that people can understand it in their first language. It's also really important to make sure that you've got your helplines or your whistleblowing lines accessible, visible to all employees. And both Smarts and BIFA have a helpline, a whistleblowing line, and both of our employees can use either of those lines to report concerns. So that's really your foundation to make sure that everybody's trained, everybody understands it. And then what we did was make sure that we had a robust modern day slavery policy in place, and various guides on how to spot the sign, managers' guides on what to do, how to report concerns. And again, make sure that those are available in languages for all your employees. We also made sure that we had robust action plans as well to drive improvement in this area and on this agenda, this very important topic. We've talked a lot this morning about modern day slavery statements. We've been providing those since 2017. We talk about what we've achieved in the previous year, and we talk about what we want to achieve in the coming year, and detail our KPIs as well. Something that both BIFA and Smarts did was become founder members of the Slave Free Alliance back in October 2018, and we're still active members today. It's been a great support to us for this continuous improvement. Since February 2019, we've also, both companies have taken part in the Shine a Light on Modern Slavery, the End It movement. And we've also participated in a number of Anti-Slavery Day campaigns since October 2019. As I said, it's a continuous process of reviewing and updating these, updating our training, updating our guides, which we'll come on to talk about a little bit more. But I'm just going to hand over to Matt to talk about strengthening our response.
Thanks, Mel. So as we move forward and we've developed, as Mel said, our strategy and our process over the last 4 or 5 years, we'll now take you through how we've done some of those things and what have been the key successes as we've moved through our partnership. I think the diagram we've got here says it all, really. The key to our partnership has always been to put people first, and by doing that, we continue to sort of ensure that our commercial considerations, all of those things, are put to the back when anything occurs around modern slavery. So no matter what we do, our strategy and our emphasis has always been about people. And as you can see here, that people system drives everything we do. It's how we work, how we collaborate, how we share information. So I would say to any business listening today that the key to your partnership with your labour provider, or for labour providers with your client, is this open and honest, transparent partnership. Whatever you can do within that just strengthens your response to tackle any cases that you may have within your business. One of the key successes early on that both ourselves and BIFA work towards is the exchange of information. And I think that, it sounds something incredibly simple when we discuss it here today, but for two separate commercial entities to share the information that we share with BIFA and that BIFA share with us is incredible, really. And it's taken a lot of time to build up that trust between both businesses that we're able to do that. But we know that when we share information, we get results. That two-way flow of information has been an incredible success, and has really been helped by the Slave Free Alliance as well, who've encouraged us to get to that point, as they are with every business at the moment, so that whatever intelligence we may have, or whatever intelligence BIFA have, we share between us, we share with the Slave Free Alliance, we share with local police forces as they share with us, and we ensure that anything that's going on in our businesses, we're both aware of, and we tackle it head on together. I think it's easy to become complacent in this, and it's probably one of the things that that we've got to strive to keep doing is how do you reinvent this? How do you keep moving this forward as your partnership evolves and as our partnerships evolved over the last 4 to 5 years. But I think through keeping this information flowing, you draw ideas off each other. So as we take you through the next few slides, I think it's important that we share some of the things that we're doing together at the moment, and some of those are BIFA initiatives that Smart Solutions are working with as well, and some of these will be Smart Solutions initiatives that BIFA have taken on. And there's no competition between us at all there. It doesn't matter who's had the idea, whether it be BIFA HR or Smart Solutions operations, wherever it's come from, we share that information. And if it's something that we all feel will move our response forward, and we put that in place as a collective and take it forward. So I'll move on to the next slide and just start to take you through some of the things that we have been doing. One of the things that we've introduced with Smart Solutions and heavily trialled within BIFA over the last couple of years is an introduction of an undercover team. And we felt this really important, that although both BIFA and Smart have spent a lot of time training our frontline staff, as Mel alluded to, and certainly those ones in those areas where we feel are at most risk, such as our materials recovery facilities, we felt like we needed to do something else behind that. I'm really sorry, my screen's just giving me a shutdown. Sorry about that. If it does, I will come straight back on. Apologies for that. So we've introduced this undercover team, and this team has been working within BIFA, but also across all of our facilities that we work on, and they speak the language of majority of our nationalities that work for us, but they can just get underneath the workforce that we have, and they just listen and work within the teams and just feed back to us if they've got anybody they've got concerns about, or if there's any conversations that are going on in the background that they may have concerns about. And again, it's just been another way that we've been able to get intel from within our workforce that we can then look to do something with, whether that's BIFA or Smart. I'll move on, and I think I'm handing back to you, Mel.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Matt. So yeah, some of the things additional things that we've done at BIFA to strengthen our response is some of our procedures. So we're an increasingly acquisitive company, so we've looked to enhance our modern slavery due diligence checks and undertake risk assessments, make sure that our company modern day slavery e-learning and materials are rolled out across the new company following the M&A completion. We also engage with the SFA as well to conduct threat assessments of newly acquired businesses. We've also done a review and updated some of our standard operating procedures around our modern day slavery checks that our employee services team undertake. So for example, looking for duplicate bank accounts, looking for duplicate addresses, looking for duplicate next of kin. All of these things could be indicators of multiple occupancy and then potential victims of modern slavery. So we make sure that those checks are as robust as possible and that we've got a full audit process of those checks. With regard to training, then we've updated our e-learning module and incorporated a modern day slavery section into our driver CPC training. And that's really important because they're the eyes and ears on the ground for us. They're going to either commercial properties or going to people's homes, and they can spot signs such as overflowing bins, which could be, again, an indicator of multiple occupancy and potential victims of modern day slavery. You may have seen throughout the pandemic our high-vis heroes and some of the work that they do to support the members of the public if they identify somebody that's had an accident or that there's an issue. So they are out there helping the public already. There's more that they can do to support from a modern day slavery perspective, and that's why it's really vitally important that we make sure that they're fully trained. So something that we've done is given them access to our Modern Slavery Toolbox Talk via our employee app, so it makes it quick and easy for them to access that information. I think we're moving on. Yep. So I know there's been quite a bit of talk about this already today, and BIFA was a founding member of the Waste and Recycling Modern Day Slavery Working Group that Susan was talking about. And the aim there is to reduce the risk of modern slavery in the waste sector by working together, working in partnership on a number of areas, such as common modern slavery challenges within the waste sector, like the risk assessment of our supply chains. And because we've got different size organisations as part of that group, then it's really important that we bring different perspectives. And for some companies that aren't members of the Slave Free Alliance or smaller companies that don't have the resources, then they're able to benefit from being part of that group and sharing best practice and ideas, and exploring cross-sector initiatives on modern slavery. And raising awareness. You probably saw last year the Waste Sector Says Zero campaign that we worked with Hope for Justice and some of the waste companies. We've also mentioned about the IPHR group, and both BIFA and SMARTS are active members of this group. And I know Diane's talked about this. Afia Howe, one of my team, is part of the working group and helping to pull together some of those resources that they're talking about to address some of the high human rights issues in the waste sector as well. If we move on. So I think I'm starting on this one, yeah. So talking about raising awareness, then hopefully some of you saw our Trucks campaign last year back in October 2020. It was a joint awareness raising campaign with Hope for Justice, and we had 10 anti-slavery branded trucks in cities across the country sharing our zero tolerance message. And Corinne mentioned that Theresa May spotted one of these trucks in London, one of the trucks that you can see on the image there. So what we did, as well as the branding the trucks, which are still out there and still have the branding on them, the drivers of those trucks received even further detailed training and briefing on our work on modern slavery, so that they could answer questions if people and members of the public asked them questions. So again, how to spot the signs, how to report a concern, and really sort of make sure that they fully understand and can deal with questions around the work that we're doing. We also provided them with, which you might be able to see on the image, a high-vis vest with a zero tolerance to modern slavery message on the back of their jackets as well. And I know that at SMARTS they have their shift leaders and supervisors have T-shirts with "Not on my shift" on their tops to demonstrate that, you know, we just do not tolerate modern slavery in our businesses and supply chains. As I mentioned, we did a collective social media push with Hope for Justice around the waste sector having a zero tolerance to modern slavery. And as I mentioned, we updated our Modern Slavery Toolbox Talk and made that available and more accessible to frontline operatives via our employee app. We also updated our modern slavery collateral for managers and rolled that out. My team are also passionate about tackling modern day slavery, and we took part in the Hope for Justice Go the Distance fundraising challenge to raise important funds for the work that Hope for Justice are doing. I'm now going to hand over to Matt to talk a little bit more about some of the activities we've been doing.
Thanks, Mel. So I think both businesses have been incredibly supportive, really, in the Anti-Slavery Day campaigns that have gone over the last 2 or 3 years. And I think what we've really tried to do is engage all of our employees. And it's important that everybody within our business feels part of the day, and that they can take part in some small way throughout the day and really live the message that both Biffa and Smart are trying to drive through the business. So 2019, we did some big poster campaigns just to raise awareness and promote modern slavery within our supply chains. And both companies updated our supplier packs and really went into quite a lot of detail. Biffa ran a really successful day for their suppliers, where Slave Free Alliance came and did a presentation, and we really just pushed that to ensure that people that want to come and work with either Biffa or Smart are living and breathing the same standards and the same ideology that we are towards modern slavery. And as part of that, the sort of poster campaigns and everything that were rolled out through Biffa sites and Smart Solutions sites really engaged not just our workforce, but our staff as well, alongside refreshers of training. As Mel's mentioned, we in 2020 ran a campaign again for Not On My Shift, and as Mel said, you know, we updated our branding, so posters, awareness campaigns around a lot of the sites, but also branding our PPE and workwear, so that, you know, really even our sort of frontline staff and workers were seeing a refresh of the standards coming out centrally from us, so that they could see something different. And I think, you know, we go onto any waste site and we know that there's 1,000,001 health and safety posters and policies and everything else up that people walk past every day. And I think with the campaigns we're trying to run, you've got to keep refreshing those all the time, because otherwise they just blend into the background of everything else. So as we've done this last couple of years, we focused a lot of our effort around things like toilet stalls and areas like that, where we know people are alone, they can see an image in front of them, they can get those confidential helplines and make those calls if necessary. So I think it's just really keeping everything you do fresh, but thinking about where you put things as well. You know, if somebody is feeling vulnerable, you know, having a poster in the middle of a canteen where everybody else can see them is just not, you know, they're just not going to be able to get to that poster and take the details off it. So you've really got to think about those things. And the last two sort of slavery days that we've been involved in, we really have refreshed that again, and we'll continue to do so. And we're already working on 2021. So similar ethos for Shine a Light on Slavery Day. We all took part in the Red X on Our Hands, and we focused a lot of effort, both Biffa and Smart, again, engaging with our staff across the board. So we asked all of our staff to get your photos taken, share it on social media, share it back with us centrally, so that we could really push the message and get everybody to feel like they were taking part. We all did it at a senior level in Smart, and Michael and his team within Biffa did exactly the same. So it's just, you know, it's a subtle message that you're trying to keep running through your business all of the time, and it's just an easy way to do it, but it's an easy way to keep the message fresh and involve your teams in it at the same time. I think I'm handing back to you, Mel.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm just conscious of time. We've only got a couple more slides to go through, and that's the sort of looking forward. So the campaigns for this year, and then really our next steps. So we've got a number of campaigns. We're partnering with Ride for Freedom this year, a social enterprise that undertakes cycling challenges to raise awareness of modern slavery. And this is led by human rights advocate and Guinness World Record holder Gordon Miller. So there's a number of cycling campaigns. One of them shines a light on the route that an actual victim of modern day slavery was trafficked along. And so that starts in Cadiz in Spain and ends up in London on Anti-Slavery Day on October the 18th. And Biffa are taking part in the last two legs of that tour when it reaches the UK. He's also trying to set another Guinness World Record challenge as part of that ride as well. The collaboration also extends to a coordinated intra-company bike ride that will conclude on Cycle to Work Day on the 5th of August 2021. And what we're trying to do there is to transport an unlocked padlock as a symbol of freedom and moving that between our sites and moving that up and down the country to raise awareness and also to raise funds. The other thing that we're sponsoring is Gordon's Premier League and Euro 2020 cycling tour. And that's really because when we heard about it, we were horrified around this not so well known form of modern slavery, where young aspiring footballers are targeted by traffickers and encouraged to come to Europe with the promises of better lives and trials with football clubs. The stats are horrific. Within Europe's football industry, it's estimated that there's a staggering 15,000 human trafficking victims each year. And when we heard about that, we needed to take action. So hopefully that will go some way to, again, raise awareness and raise some funds for a worthy cause. I think I'm handing back to you now, Matt.
Thanks, Mel. I think an important point, and as we come to the end here, is really looking at the remediation for survivors of modern slavery, and it's an area that both Biffa and ourselves in SMART feel really strongly about, and want to move our businesses to thinking more and more about that. Of yes, we're good at identifying cases and getting people to where they need to be. What do we do about these poor individuals when they need to get back into a life in the UK and get back into work and go through that process? So we're working with a couple of organisations. One is the Jericho Foundation that help with rehabilitation and getting people back into work all over the UK, and it's been incredibly successful, and we're working closely with them and Biffa. One of the things, and I know it came up, and Susan I think mentioned it earlier on, was about that escalation phase. What do you do when you've identified somebody, and how do you get them, to that next safe space? And what we've developed within SMART are rescue packs. So all of our sites have a pack on site that allows our account management team to access hotels, funds for food, an escalation phase that goes all the way through our business, right up to our CEO, of home numbers. They can get it, they can contact people, they can make everybody aware, straight into Hope for Justice. And it's just a support package around every single site should we need to use it, and it's been incredibly successful, certainly for any potential victims, but not just this, but for other cases that might come forward, of victims of abuse at home and all those sorts of things that we've also been able to help. And a great one that Biffa are working on is the Free Will Pilot Programme, that is looking with the charity Unseen to sponsor people with bikes, cycling proficiency training, to help them with a form of getting to work and getting some travel. And the cycling wheel of that really is all around the symbolism of freedom of people being able to get back into the work environment. So I think we're on this one last, Mel, and I think it's us together, isn't it? Is what's next. Both companies are working at the moment to introduce modern day slavery champions into our business. So both companies at the moment, modern day slavery is really focused around our HR teams leading the way with advice for the wider teams. But what we both feel is we need champions within our regions, within our business, who are experts, who can give advice to the wider team. So we're both on that journey at the moment, and we're hoping to have that in place for this year. We both feel we want to expect our back to work schemes. We've mentioned Jericho, but we want to work with other people there to be able to get people back into work, and not necessarily with Smart or Biffa, but just back into work wherever that may be. I think I'll hand back to you, Mel, for the last couple of points.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So we mentioned earlier about a customer and supplier day that we held a couple of years ago. We want to hold another one on the 19th of October, so the week of Anti-Slavery Day. And not only do we want to talk to them about the work that we're doing on modern slavery to raise awareness, we also want to introduce them to the Slave Free Alliance as well, and encourage more people to become members. But the key thing that we also want to do is to talk to them about establishing a pilot abolition group in the Midlands that Biffa and Smarts want to do, working in conjunction with Hope for Justice. And this is really key because we want to be able to raise awareness, to raise funds, to take action and share intelligence and best practice across a community in an area. And what the hope is that if we can get all different types of organisations and charities together, working together, sharing intelligence, we've talked about the importance of partnerships. If we can do that, then we're likely to have more of an impact, the power of people coming together to support a good cause and tackle modern slavery right at the very root. And hopefully, if it's successful, then it could be a blueprint that we could then look to roll out further afield across the country, and talk to the government about support for such groups. So apologies, we've slightly overrun, but that's the end. We're happy to take questions, or I can take them at the panel discussion if we've finished our slot now. Thank you.
Guys, I really apologise. My laptop is going to time out, and I'll be 2 seconds, and I'll be back in.
Thanks.
Back in a second.
Well, thank you so much to Melanie and Matt there. I think that there's an awful lot that others can learn from there. And Melanie, you'll be joining us for the Q&A session at the end. So I've got some questions here for you for then. So we'll have to we'll take them. But we'll have a 5-minute break, and then we should come straight back with City Heart. So don't go away.
Thank you.
And welcome back. Next, we'll hear from City Heart. It is very important we keep in mind those that have been directly affected by modern slavery. And as we've heard from different smart solutions there, a lot of businesses are involved in helping people directly. City Heart works with victims of forced labour to help them back into long-term employment and live independently. And of course, as we heard, the waste and resources sector can have a role in this. So I shall hand over to Kirsty Hart, Integration Support Programme Coordinator. Kirsty, over to you.
Thanks, Corin. Hello, everyone. As Corin said, my name is Kirsty, and I'm going to be speaking specifically today about our Bright Future programme, which supports survivors of modern slavery into work. So I'll share my screen. Great, so what I'm going to be covering today is why we came up with the Bright Future programme, what it is exactly and what we do, and a little bit about our partners and membership as well. So why Bright Future? Well, City Heart is an organisation that supports survivors of modern-day slavery across the north of the UK. We are an NRM provider, so we have safe houses and outreach programmes to support survivors with all their recovery needs. And about kind of 4 or 5 years ago, we had a particular incident that really sparked something within us and showed that there was something that really needed to be done here. So we were working with a group of European men in one of our safe houses, and we were able to connect them to health services, help them regain access to ID, get a bank account, but then we had to exit them from our safe house. And they went off, and then a couple of months later they came back and said, look, you guys, you helped me so much, but we're still really struggling to find employment. Without employment, this particular group couldn't access benefits in this country. So without employment, we're basically on the streets. We're forced to go back to our situation of exploitation because there's no other option for us. And we really knew that there was a problem here. There was something more that we could do in order to help people avoid the cycle of exploitation, just going back to what they'd worked so hard to recover from. And some of the reasons that the client group we work with face challenges accessing employment independently is because of the lack of qualifications they might have had for their exploitation, the gaps in their employment history when there's been a difficulty explaining that to new employers, and then of course just a general lack of confidence after years of exploitation and abuse, and going back into an environment that seems to trigger some of those feelings. Just with there being a line manager, sometimes that can really trigger someone and it reminds them of their exploiter because that position of authority. So what we did was we started reaching out to different businesses because we knew this was something we couldn't do ourselves as a charity organisation. We knew we needed the support of businesses to host supported work placements. And we originally came across the Co-op supermarket that were incredibly supportive and helpful and helped us with the programme off the ground. And the way that it works is we, as a charity, we have a group of survivors that we're working with, and we will identify the survivors that are ready to work. So that means, you know, checking that all the legal requirements are in place. They do have the right to work in this country. They've got their bank account. They've got a national insurance number, but then also some softer assessment questionnaires just around, you know, would they be able to commit to work at this point? Have they overcome significant trigger points? And also just evaluating, are they in stable accommodation, or is that going to rock them when they're starting their employment? So once we identify someone that's ready to work, we'll then refer them over to the business. And so initially it was the Co-op, but we're now working with a larger number of business partners, which I'll go into on the next slides. And they will provide direct for the survivor. It's a fast track, so they're not expected to fill out all the normal application forms or have a formal interview process, but instead we arrange basically an informal chat between the survivor, their support worker and the line manager, more so just so they can have an insight into the environment that they'll potentially be working in, so that they can make sure that they're comfortable with it before they get started. And the really key parts of the programme are that every work placement is paid from day one. From the minute they start working, they'll receive that pay in their bank account. So it's not work experience, it's not volunteering, it's very much a paid placement. Every placement is anonymous, so it's only their line manager and usually the HR business partner for that site that will be aware that they've come from the Bright Future programme. Everyone else on site just thinks they look like any other new starter. And it's really key as well that the roles are permanent, and that if they are successful in the 4-week placement, there is actually a job for them to go and take, because we really see Bright Future as the opportunity for people to start rebuilding their lives, and we want to give them stable positions for them to start doing that. So Bright Future is a cooperative, so it's a limited cooperative, like a limited company, but a limited cooperative, and that basically means that we have a group of business partners, business members and charity members. So there are different charities that refer into the programme. They've committed to be able to support their candidates throughout, and then there's a group of business members who have committed to host the placements. And yes, we launched in March 2017, and since then have supported 66 survivors to complete the 4-week placement, and 47 of those have then secured permanent employment with the business. That, as you can imagine, was slightly stalled in last year's events, but we're on the move now, starting to catch a few more candidates to placements. So these are some of our referral partners, different charities we work with across the country who refer into the programme. You might recognise some of them. Some of them are NRM providers, some of them might be homelessness charities, but they also, a lot of the people they work with will also have been victims of trafficking, so they can refer in as well. So yeah, we cover most of the major cities in England, and also a few in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and a couple in Wales as well. So it's quite vast, the reach. And then these are some of our business partners. Some of them have been working with us longer than others. So for example, the Co-op are very kind of confident with the programme and can roll it out to most of their stores, whereas some of our newer partners are still trialling in their first kind of pilot sites that they're doing it with. As you can see, we try as much as possible to work with as many different sectors, just to make sure that we're fulfilling the interests of the candidates and that they can choose to work in an environment that really kind of interests them and fulfills them, so that hopefully they're really long-term positions that they can progress in. So I've just got a folder that shows the journey of one of our clients that we've supported.
V detstve by sa nedalo povedať, že som mal dobre. S cudzíma ľuďmi nie je to rodina. Nebola tam rodina, nič. Opustil decák, my sme si našli rodičov. No a začali sa tam problémy, užera, chudoba a tiež nezmierenie sa s chudom, jak cudzí ľudia s rodičmi väčšine vyhadzovať vonka. Ľudia, ktorí ma poznali, ujali sa ma s tým, že budem robiť za jedlo a za spanie. Že prídem sem, že budem mať zamestnanie, že sa budem mať dobre. Ale mal som ako že možno si zmeníme lepšie život, že už bude lepšie. A to o ničom bolo nič. Takže tam tiež už som začal robiť ako na warehouse. Neboli mi poskytnuté nič z mojej výplaty. Umývať taniere za nich, robiť im sluhu, že sa to začne stupňovať stále horšie. On si už nosil ďalších ľudí. Dostal od neho facku. Keď ma tak udrel, že mi krv tiekla z nosa. Tam už tedy som začal pociťovať strach, neistotu. Však on mi aj povedal, že som otrok. Nikto nevedel, aké som mal vnútorné pocity, že prečo sa to deje, prečo ja nemám nič. Už som rozmýšľal, že spácham samovraždu. Prešli 3 roky, aj 4 roky prešli, 5 roky, 6, až teraz v posledním roku 2015 to vypuklo. Už som si povedal, stačí, dosť. Prišla mi SMS-ka od City Heart, že či chcem robiť cez Coop. Som tam nastúpil ako na mesiac, na zaškolenie, na cvičenie. Prešiel mesiac, prišiel manažer a mi povedal, že mi gratuluje. Mal som z toho radosť, od tej doby tam delám. Oni mi pomohli. Že aj v práci už sa čudujú, že už lepšia zmena, že nikto mi neriadi život, riadím si ho sám.
So I hope both that video and then also this quote that I've got on the screen there just shows that the candidates, we don't really see ourselves as a charity in this programme. We see ourselves as not providing charity, but providing opportunities for candidates, and they're the ones that really are able to take the opportunity and make it into a success. And we can see that just with a little bit of support and a little bit of encouragement and a bit of a fast track into work, it can really give people encouragement and self-esteem boosts that they need. So in terms of membership, the way that it works is we have both charity members that refer and then business members that host the work placements. And as it goes for the businesses that are wanting to join, they commit to host. Because it's a cooperative, each member then has a say in the running of Bright Future and the decisions that are made. So each member has one vote. The Bright Future board is voted in and renewed every year. And so each business member has the opportunity to apply to be a board member each year. And the business members also contribute towards the running cost of Bright Future. So each business pays a set amount each year. We don't ask our charity members to contribute financially, but yeah, just the business members. So if anyone has an interest in becoming a business member with the Bright Future programme, you can contact us there on that email address, and we're happy to discuss it further and to maybe share our membership pack so that can be considered. So yes, any questions are very welcomed. I don't know if I have time, Corinne, for questions, but if not, I'm happy to receive any by email as well.
That's marvellous. Kirsty, thank you so much for that. I think it's a very eye-opening presentation you gave, and I think, as I said before, that it's very important that we understand the impact on people and how this crime can be so hidden, but have such an impact. Just one quick question before we go on: how successful have the placements been so far? Can you say? Yes,
the placements have been, we think, successful. So as I said with the figures at the beginning, it shows that 72% of candidates that start a placement will then get the permanent position with the business. So sometimes, you know, the candidates aren't quite able to fulfill the role, and the business will say, it's been great, give some really positive feedback, but won't be able to provide them the permanent position. But then some of them will actually be offered it, but then they will say, you know, I've learned so much, but I think I've realized that the sector isn't for me. So just shows that sometimes it's the business that don't want to continue, sometimes it's the candidate, but 72% of the time we see people go into permanent work. So we're quite pleased with that figure.
That's marvellous. Thanks, Kirsty. Well, I think we have to move on now, but of course we'll pass on any further questions we get, and we'll keep the conversation going. Sure. So we have another 5-minute break, and then we'll hear from Rob Richardson, the head of the Slavery and Human Trafficking Unit at the National Crime Agency. So see you soon. And welcome back. We will now hear from Rob Richardson, the head of the Slavery and Human Trafficking Unit at the National Crime Agency. I'm so pleased to welcome you along. Thank you very much indeed for agreeing to take part. The NCA leads on the response to organised crime involvement in modern slavery, and we'll have a short presentation from Rob, and then we'll go straight into the Q&A session as well. So Rob, over to you.
Thanks, Corinne, and that's right. So the NCA's role in this is to lead the response to serious organised crime, and my unit, which is the Modern Slavery Human Trafficking Unit, is part of a capability that we call threat leadership. And the purpose and the role of kind of our unit is we have a number of kind of strands. So one is around to understand the threat. So we work with a joint sort of policing unit called the Joint Slavery Trafficking Analytical Centre, and then that sort of takes intelligence officers from policing, from the GLAA, from HMRC, immigration enforcement, to develop a shared understanding of the modern slavery threat. I also act as an advocate for the threat. So in the law enforcement environment, there's lots of competing threats, and it's my role to put modern slavery as a focus for the law enforcement response and driving kind of performance with regards to kind of law enforcement activity and what we call disruptions, where we've disrupted serious and organised crime. I have responsibility as well to coordinate the response. So this is kind of bringing together a coherent set of kind of activity across the whole of the law enforcement kind of community, and I do that through a strategy that we've developed, and it's my role to kind of to deliver that strategy. It's what we call a 4P strategy. There's kind of 4 strands to it. There's what we call pursue, which is the sort of typical law enforcement activity. But I think it's really important that we also kind of have 3 other strands, which we call protect, prevent, and prepare. And a lot of the activity that I've heard about today, which is really encouraging and really forward thinking and innovative, is some of the kind of activity that we do as well. But it's really encouraging to hear some of the work that I've heard today. So we recognise that we can't just arrest our way out of the problem. But nevertheless, so from a pursue perspective, the NCA focuses on the high end of high harm. So these are the organised crime groups that are the highest end of risk. These are often groups that are capable of exploiting workers in the UK, but also capable of facilitating foreign and migrants, irregular migrants into the UK and facilitating their travel, and often exploiting them on their journey, but also being able to kind of exert control of their families overseas. And they're the groups that we kind of target our activity. But nevertheless, we support our partners with use of some of our kind of what we call our niche capability. So, for example, we have a network of officers that are based overseas to engage in inquiries with overseas partners, as well as some of our kind of top-end intelligence collection capabilities. But primarily, we deliver a series of modern slavery intensifications to raise the focus of modern slavery in a project that we call Aident. The most recent of one looked at labour in April, but had a focus particularly on the European Union settlement scheme and the opportunities for organised crime groups to exploit that, and also domestic servitude. So it was interesting to see that video just then, just to kind of highlight some of the risk around domestic servitude. These are areas that we need to kind of promote. From a prepare perspective, we coordinate that response, and we're just going to deliver kind of governance to kind of manage that. But again, it's been really interesting to hear the kind of the importance of training. So from the NCA, we deliver training predominantly in the law enforcement sector. So for example, we've been supporting the Environment Agency recently, helping them develop an e-learning package for their staff to be able to raise awareness of modern slavery. But we kind of a key strand of activity is engaging with the Home Office to review legislation, and it's really interesting to hear kind of mention of Section 54, for example. And we're working with Home Office in developing a new modern slavery strategy, and part of that is to review legislation to help give law enforcement the tools to be able to kind of better enforce the Modern Slavery Act, but also to kind of give it more teeth. And Section 54 is a good example of that. From a protect perspective, and again, really encouraging to kind of speak to hear from some of the providers of safeguarding and support to the victims of trafficking. I have a team of tactical advisors who are experts in running modern slavery investigations, and they work closely with policing and other partners to help kind of to provide safeguarding arrangements, so signposting to sort of safeguarding, and help develop safeguarding strategies for policing operations. So we can develop close relationships with those NGOs who provide victim care and support. And I mentioned training, and we recognise as well the significance and the importance of awareness raising. The public and industry are our eyes and ears, and we need them to understand the threat and then understand how to report that into law enforcement. So we have what's called the Invisible People exhibition, which is a series of kind of hard-hitting images that we kind of use to illustrate and articulate the threat, to kind of raise the awareness with the public. And through our intensification exercises, we deliver social media awareness, as well as other forms of awareness raising across the sector. And that's not just the NCA, this is kind of coordinating the response from our partners as well. Specifically to the waste sector, we delivered an Amber Alert in July 2019. So this is the last time we've had really engagement with the waste sector. That was specifically to raise awareness of the threat in the financial sector, so that they could raise a suspicious activity report if they identified indicators of modern slavery amongst their customers for those working in the waste sector. But these kind of events are really important, and industry engagement is key. And I know we're going to come to a question and answer section. I'd be interested to kind of get views on how you see that, how industry should engage better with law enforcement. I have a dedicated team which is around industry engagement, and they work closely with the industry across all sectors, as well as with NGOs, with the government and with academia. And it's really interesting to hear about your own networks for kind of information and intelligence exchange, because these are the networks that, from a law enforcement perspective, we'd look to kind of to dock in and to be able to identify how those interfaces will work. We have Daryl mentioned earlier some of those kind of networks already, and he talked about how, from the law enforcement community, we're consolidating some of our capabilities. He mentioned, for example, the single enforcement body, but we've been working with other sectors who have kind of developed their own information sharing networks to better increase the flow two-way of intelligence and information. So, for example, in the food supply chain, we have the Modern Slavery Intelligence Network, which is a collaboration of supermarkets and their suppliers to better understand the threat and to better share intelligence with law enforcement agencies. And of particular importance in this particular threat, given that non-employer model, the use of kind of recruitment agencies to identify irregular kind of staffing resources, the recruitment agencies play a big role in being able to combat this threat. And we'll be working with Staffline, who are leading on the development of a compliance intelligence network, which is allowing recruitment agencies to share intelligence amongst them, but importantly then link in with law enforcement. And just in summary, I mean, some of the challenges that we kind of have from a law enforcement perspective, one of the aspects that organised crime use to exploit and coerce their victims is their fear of deportation. So particularly those that are from overseas, have an irregular immigration status, they're particularly at risk of exploitation for the fear of being reported to the authorities and then losing their kind of rights and status in the UK. And as a consequence, victims are reluctant to come forward to law enforcement for fear of kind of those kind of sanctions. And so it's really important that we work with industry and with NGOs to provide a buffer between law enforcement and victims, to kind of build the trust and to be able to kind of reassure victims that they will be treated as victims and not as suspects. And so that another aspect of the kind of industry engagement is really important. But I'll look forward to the kind of question and answer session and be able to kind of fill in on any other questions that people have. And I'll pause there.
That's great, Robert. Thank you. That's an extremely useful overview. Very useful. This brings us to our final session, where, as Rob said, we get to ask the experts. So joining Rob, we have Paul Callum, who is Director of Resilient World Solutions, which works with businesses to identify and deal with the threat of modern-day slavery. And rejoining us, we have Daryl Dixon, Director of Strategy at Gang Masters and Labour Abuse Authority, Melanie Flogdall, Divisional HR Director at BIFA, and Susan Bannister, Head of Business Development at the Slave Free Alliance. So welcome back, everybody. It's been such an interesting day, and we had so many issues and topics. As I said at the beginning, we can't really cover everything. This is just a starter event, really. I really want to sort of take any issues gathered from this onwards and keep the conversation flowing. Perhaps if I can turn to you, Paul, first. As a former police officer yourself, you've seen the issues from all sides, and you work with businesses that want to get better at dealing with modern-day slavery. How do you see sort of the governance regime? As we've heard, they have all these responsibilities for health and safety, environment, etc. How can they sort of fold this in sort of the normal running of a business, really?
Hi, Corinne. Yes, thank you for inviting me today. Yes, I'm Paul Callum, Director of Resilient World Solutions, and I work with businesses advising around a number of different risks. I think today's been really fascinating because I think you started off talking about how has it changed in the last few years, and when you listen to BIFA talking about having people working undercover and gaining intelligence and things like that, it's fantastic how it's moved in the last 10 years. And I think the shape of compliance has changed as well. And a lot of the strategies that you've been listening to today are actually, there's a terminology that's been going around for a few years now about adopting a beyond compliance strategy. And I think that mindset of trying to do more than compliance is the way forward for all of these businesses. And this is what we've heard from all of the speakers today. Some from the law enforcement and some from business. And it's fantastic to listen to that, because I think when I first left the police 5 years ago, and I didn't know very much about businesses particularly, obviously, I think it felt like they were stuck in a compliance mindset. And I think the companies that are leading on this are the ones that have said, okay, compliance is a baseline, compliance is a minimum standard. What can I do to really drive the agenda? And they really looked at how do they know their businesses, how do they know their customers, do they know their risks, and have they got a plan? And I think that's the really encouraging message that I've picked up today.
Daryl, can I turn back to you? We heard from your talk this morning that the waste sector ranked lower than 12th in your list, but that doesn't mean to say it's any less risky. All it means is that we don't know what's going on, and if you lift a stone, that it's likely you'll find much more, and you'll get more. Do you think there's a bit of a risk there? I suppose. I mean, I'm just imagining the situation at a smaller waste firm dealing with day-to-day. Just the business of business, really, day to day, and not wanting to get involved because of this thing, because if more they find, is that sort of a dynamic that some businesses you think might go through?
Well, they may do, but I think that the key thing is that if they don't understand what the risks are, they're likely to just assume it's okay. I mean. I remember quite a number of years ago, a completely different sector. There was a case of potential overcrowding where workers were being controlled in a particular premises. It was referred to a particular police force. They sent along community officers. Community officers went, looked at the property, reported back. It looked a bit overcrowded. It was probably a bit dirty, but it was probably better than what they had before they came to the UK. And that attitude undermined understanding the risk. And it's so easy for people to just assume, oh, it looks okay. It's probably better than what they were used to. So therefore, what's the problem? And the earlier comments have been made about victims, particularly in labour exploitation, don't tend to self-identify. And that's particularly the case, you know, with male victims, because there's a pride issue about this and they don't want to feel that they're weak to other people. So, you know, you're not going to get victims self-identifying, particularly males, if they're getting paid just under national living wage. You need people and businesses of any size to understand what the risk is, and what the expected standards are for anybody that works in the United Kingdom from wherever they come from. Corinne, you're on mute.
I thought I'd clicked it. There we go. That's only once so far today. I think I've done quite well. Yes, Melanie. Sorry about that. We had a question from one session, a number of questions, but can Melanie tell us a bit more about what the Pilot Abolition Group will do?
Yes, so it's something that we've been talking about for a while now, and what we're looking to do is to, as I said, pull together businesses, charities, educational institutions, Rotary groups. There's a number of people that have got modern slavery working groups, and we're all doing our own thing. If we can pull together, pool resources, pool intelligence, pool our best practice, then we should be able to have more of an impact. And I think that, you know, one of the things that you know, we've learned is that sharing of intelligence, and that's the bit that we're trying to overcome. So I've made some notes when Robert was talking about, you know, how we can get involved as part of that compliance intelligence network, because I think that if we're able to share that information, then we've got a better chance of acting. So for me, it's about getting everybody in those communities involved so that they understand what modern slavery is, that it's happening in plain sight in front of everybody, and how to spot the signs, how to raise concerns, how we can share that intelligence, and how we can just make it so hostile for the traffickers in those communities that they won't be able to operate there. And I think that if we can then look to replicate that in all of the communities, then that's the only way we're going to tackle it. It's everybody's responsibility. This is the biggest human rights issue we've ever had. It's all of our responsibility to pull together and take action. And that's really what I want to achieve with the group.
Thanks, Melanie. Actually, information sharing and coordination is a very we constantly come back to that. Rob, perhaps can I ask you, because we had the launch of the Joint Unit on Waste Crime only recently. This is something that a lot of waste companies would be aware of. What kind of role does that and other bodies have?
So it's interesting. I'm kind of conscious that I'm leading with my chin here on the Joint Unit of Waste Crime, because from a modern slavery perspective, it's just not doing it at present. So this is a really interesting point that you make, Corinne, and I think that what we just talked about is lots of these kind of different networks that kind of sit in isolation. And with the Joint Unit for Waste Crime, I imagine you've got, and I apologise if there's people on this call who kind of are part of it, will know much more about it than me, but there will be a kind of a whole host of kind of crime that takes place in the waste sector. Now, from my perspective, from having the responsibility to coordinate not just the operational response, but also information sharing across the law enforcement community, I've had no crime engagement with the group. I've had no intelligence information that's come out of the group. Now, that's not to say that the group doesn't have value. It's just that we haven't joined the dots yet. And so there's kind of this question, isn't there? Is that do we kind of try to kind of make better use of those groups, or do we set up or make use of those groups that already exist within the modern slavery community because of our identity of them? Now, the interesting thing about modern slavery is that, you know, when we identify a crime, we're identifying the victim and require safeguarding. And so there's an awful lot of kind of specialist knowledge that's required, which I think is different to kind of other crime types. We talk about fraud, but the connection to the victim is much less obvious. And so my preference, rightly or wrongly, is that when we kind of look at information sharing, we look at it purely from the perspective of modern slavery, because the priority is around identifying the victims, safeguarding them, reassuring them that they can come forward and be protected by law enforcement. And once we've done that, then we can then look at what the criminal justice response needs to be around identifying the perpetrators behind it. And we do those in parallel. So from the joint unit of waste crime, I do have concerns that being able to identify victims quickly, it may not happen. But I'm more than happy to put right if I could put that on.
Thanks, Rob. Perhaps I can put this question to Susan and then Paul as well, because you work with business directly. Susan first, do you see businesses being confused about what regulators, enforcers, information sharing, and what's their experience?
Do I think there's confusion? I think we're getting better, but I think it's interesting what Rob was saying. I think there's silos of practice going on, and really it would be great if we could join it up. For example, with the intelligence sharing within the supermarkets, that was set up after Operation 4, and working with the police there, and actually seeing the benefits of sharing that information with the police, with businesses, because businesses are doing audits on suppliers all the time. That information can provide you know, the necessary piece in the puzzle for the police if they know whether to provide it or not. In the Leicester region, where there's the garment sector, we're working on a AGM-PPP, which is apparel and general merchandising public-private protocol. I keep saying we need to change the name, it's just too long, but that's bringing together, I think there's 90 organisations in that, and that's bringing together NGOs, suppliers, manufacturers, and the law enforcement agencies, and we're looking at ways of sharing information there. So I think, like I say, there's pockets of good practice, but I think with anything, there's always ways to improve it. I think what would be very helpful for businesses is to know the difference between information and enforceable actionable intelligence, because that could be the difference for something actually happening, rather than just going into the pack of information. Still useful, because if you add it all up, it then does become intelligence. But I think that would be some real practical steps that would help businesses.
Thank you. And Paul, the same question to you. I mean, you work in business on the ground. I think
it's interesting. It depends what sector and what type of business and their sort of stage of maturity. I first got involved in this sort of arena in the food production and worked very closely with the Gangmaster licensing. And the journey that the food industry has been in is very different to some of the journeys that other industries have been in. Susan just mentioned Leicester. We've just done a sort of about 5-month project in Leicester with very small suppliers into the retailers on the back of all the issues that they had last summer. And, you know, a lot of it is denial. A lot of it is fear of reporting and getting dropped by retailers. And a lot of it, there's a lot of concern that the compliance programs are being done to the suppliers rather than with them. And certainly in other industries, I've seen a bit more of a collaborative approach. I think in the textile sector, and I don't want to get drawn into that, I know we haven't got time, but the textile sector, for example, are at a different level of maturity. So I think it really depends on sectors. I also work with a company, a global company in the chemical industry, and they are way behind some of the sort of programs. And I suppose the acceptance that it's going to be happening in their supply chains as well. They are very much where Daryl this morning talked about companies that said that they're very low risk and they haven't got a problem. But, you know, you only take a couple of steps away with your subcontracted workers, and then you may well have a problem. So I think, yeah, in answer to your question, it really depends what sector and what type of business model that you've actually got.
That's interesting. Actually, I'm interested. I don't think I've asked this before, but is there a sort of a minimum size business you work with? I mean, is it sort of basically what I'm saying is, like, sort of, as we said before, sort of a lot of the smaller waste companies just don't have the resources necessarily to hire services. What's the smallest business you do work with?
Well, the biggest one I've got is the one I just mentioned, which has got a £4 billion turnover, and the smallest ones are, you know, ones with £1 million, £2 million turnover. So, you know, I work with any businesses that want to help build a compliance program, really, and sort of start to understand the 4 Ps model, really, that Robert talked about, because it's ingrained in you in the police. I think it's a really simple model to understand, and you can build a really good structure behind that. So one of the strategies I do with business is to say, okay, what can we do as a 4 Ps model, and help to build programs, really.
And by the way, if any panelists wants to jump in on anything, please do. Just I know it's quite difficult with these sort of Zoom sessions, but we can get through it. Now, Daryl, we had a question in. Hope I can read this out right. Is there value in focusing upstream, focusing on licensing and inspecting recruiting organisations, requiring companies to use recruiters who are licensed?
Well, firstly, as you'll appreciate from what I said in my presentation earlier, we only license companies that operate in the agricultural sector. However, as you'll appreciate, over a period of many years and austerity and downturns in the economy, if businesses that were operating traditionally in the agricultural sector had always stayed in the agricultural sector, they'd probably gone out of business by now. A lot of them diversified into providing workers into a multitude of different sectors. So if you were to go through companies, you would find, as you did in fact in the Operation Fork case, that the company, because they provided workers into agriculture at some points, did hold a license. And so, you know, there are a range of businesses that we do not license and control the way they operate in other industries, but are licensed because of the fact that they have done or intend to or are providing workers into the agricultural sector. Any employment agency that operates in England, Wales and Scotland, it's a similar organisation in Northern Ireland, is actually also regulated separately by the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate. They don't have the same set of powers as us, they don't have the same number of staff as us, but employment agencies do come under their responsibility. And back in 1973, all employment agencies were licensed, but in 1992 they were deregulated, so it's only licensing that occurs in our sector. However, the employment agency standards ourselves, as I mentioned earlier, will all be part of the single enforcement body. So how we evolve a broader compliance approach to all employment agencies will be clearly something that will be developed within the framework of the new single enforcement body.
And we had another question as well. What is your definition of category A of modern slavery as opposed to B through D, which sound like they fit the criteria for modern slavery, perhaps not with the greatest negative impact?
Sorry, Corin, you're on mute to begin with. I don't know who you were sending that question to.
Sorry, Daryl, that was to you again. Sorry, Daryl.
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, sorry, apologies. Could you repeat the question?
Will do. Sorry about this. What is your definition of category A of modern slavery as opposed to B through D, which sound like they fit the criteria for modern slavery, but perhaps not with the greatest negative impact?
Well, I'm sorry, but I've not been using the category A, category B through D type approach to it, so I'm not sure where that's being used. The Modern Slavery Act did not define modern slavery. Okay, and that was an issue that came up in the debate when the Modern Slavery Act was going through. So what you have to look at is, what is the definition of forced labour? Okay, and that's the key part that you should focus on. And the real definition, therefore, takes you back to the ILO's Palermo Protocol, which defines what forced labour is and the sectors and the things that it can cover. And then you have to look really at how it manifests itself. Okay, so when we talk about a continuum of compliance, in a sense, which starts off with a business that is compliant to one that is breaching employment regulations by mistake, and probably not in every case concerned with its workers, but one here, one there, to those that are then endemically breaking the rules. And that can be things like temporary employment agencies that are withholding holiday pay when workers leave because they think they might come back, so they don't give them a P45. You know, people are abusing the technicalities of the tax system to exploit workers in ways that workers don't understand, to then going up that scale to where you get into the psychological and the physical control of the worker, whether that's by threat, mental or physical, and the way in which their bank accounts, accommodation, transportation is controlled. And then, of course, you're getting to the high end, where it is clearly not just somebody that's getting into breaching regulations and then stretching into forced labour, but actually intends that as their business operating model, because they're an organised crime group where we need the resources of the police and National Crime Agency to tackle those sorts of things.
Great.
But what I would always say is, and we've had this before, is that when you've got modern slavery, when you look at it and you've got forced labour, clearly you've got breaches of lots of other employment regulations, such as national minimum wage. When you've got a national minimum wage offence, you've not always got modern slavery.
Gotcha. Thanks for clearing that up. That's extremely useful. A quick question for Rob, actually. Now, you mentioned working with the Environment Agency, example of regulators getting together, coordinating. Do local authorities have a role, need a role? What's the situation there?
So we look at that from a national level. So, you know, we will work with the local government association and do that from a strategic perspective. And so the NTA rarely will get involved with local authorities individually. The relationship often with local authorities will be with police. So often the police will develop relationships with social services, particularly when it comes with the safeguarding of children, and local police manage those relationships.
Thanks for that. Melanie, I think that your mention of undercover teams has gained a lot of interest. Getting to know the workforce, overcoming. Yeah, well, there we go. Overcoming language barriers. It's something that can happen sort of across businesses. Can smaller businesses sort of hire a team in? Doing it through BIFA, but is it possible to sort of expand this out wider? It seems like a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I think it's something that other organisations can do. Obviously, if you were moving a team in that they're not recognised as sort of current employees, they might raise questions. So, you know, these are sort of people that can, that fully understand modern slavery, able to spot the signs, that are able to speak the language, and that are able to then, you know, have conversations with people. As we've said, victims don't always self-identify. They're concerned about other people perhaps noticing if they were to contact somebody in authority, you know, it may be that it's easier to use your labour providers where churn is normal, to then replace some of that turnover with the undercover team that can then go in and really understand what's going on the ground. Because people are fearful of authority and perhaps fearful of talking to their supervisor, they might be more likely to speak to somebody, a co-worker, somebody on the team.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. That's something we'll definitely be looking into further, I think. Now, it's almost time for us to wrap up. I just wanted to quickly go around all the panelists and just the basic question. Imagine this event is being held exactly a year from now. What do you think would have been done on modern-day slavery, and what do you think would you like to have been seen done? Perhaps Melanie, let's sort of go straight from there.
Well, from my perspective, I'd like to see our abolition group up and running and successful, and a blueprint that we can roll out further afield. And for me, I just want organisations to continue. A number of people have talked about, you know, people are concerned and fearful of you know, being open about rooting out or identifying victims of modern slavery. But I think organisations should be encouraged to work with people to improve their and strengthen their response to modern slavery. And people shouldn't be condemned for identifying and rooting it out. They should be encouraged to speak up and take actions and share learnings, which is what Smarts and BIFRA have tried to do.
Excellent, thank you. And Susan, same question to you.
I think it's the extension of the collaborations that we're seeing to work together to end modern slavery. Just on that with Mel, I think, for me, I would like the media to change, and there's no pointing fingers here, Karen, but the media to change the narrative, because sometimes the finger pointing and the shaming of businesses isn't always at the right businesses, the ones who are doing things, and I don't think it's helping us with the cause, as it were. So I think for me, just wider collaboration, working together, and just general raising awareness, making people aware that this hasn't gone away. This is on the streets in the UK, and it's everywhere.
Rob, I'll ask you the same question then. Where do you see yourself in the situation in a year, and what kind of targets, I suppose, does the NCA have?
So the Home Office are currently rewriting the modern slavery strategy, which was written in 2014, and so we are lobbying them hard for kind of funding is always an issue. Daryl mentioned earlier about kind of resources, but nevertheless, what we kind of recognise is that we're not going to arrest our way out of the problem, and so with regards to the kind of new strategy, we're lobbying the Home Office hard to kind of to strengthen some of the provisions of Section 54. To make that less of a box ticking exercise and something that actually is something that can be enforced much more readily by law enforcement agencies. But one of the kind of gaps that we do have across the law enforcement environment is dedicated, trained, professional, specialist modern slavery investigators. So some forces do have dedicated teams that specialise in intelligence and investigations and focus on modern slavery, and as a consequence, their performance reflects that. However, there are other agencies, and the NCA is included, do not have dedicated modern slavery units. And so, in a year's time, if this is your Christmas present to me, Corinne, that would be kind of what we'd aim for, is kind of widespread training, specialist intelligence and investigative teams that specialise on modern slavery.
That's excellent. Thanks, Rob. Paul, your turn.
I'm just mindful of time, just a very quick one. I think I'd like to see lots more businesses just give it a go, kick off a little program of activity. There's loads of help out there. You've got all the charities and organisations that have been on this call. You've got the GLA, you've got some fantastic resources on their website, and obviously the NCA, local police authorities, etc. There's people like myself and businesses that work, and consultants that work with small businesses. Give it a go, and I would say develop a continuous improvement program, an investigative mindset, and clear the ground from under your feet is an expression that the SIOs on the call will understand. But it's get your own house in order first. Have a look at what your own process is, and then work outwards.
That's excellent. And Daryl, we started the day off with you, so it's fitting you have the final word. A year from now, what would you like to see?
Well, obviously, I think that a greater awareness amongst the industry, an understanding of how modern slavery can occur, and that therefore will lead to greater information coming into us that identifies cases that do need investigation. There are always cases that don't, and we still get information on those in other sectors, but certainly a better understanding of the sector will give us better intelligence, and that will be the more actionable intelligence that we can do something about. And with a single enforcement body, one of the strands it will be looking at is greater education and awareness and guidance for industry, whatever industry it is, around fair employment. So that's the key for me. And then I'll just add one other thing. The A to E issue before, it was actually on my slide, and apologies for that, because I was sidetracked into thinking about the way in which we sometimes categorize intelligence rather than that. It was used simply to illustrate the different levels of the information that we find, which I think I may have covered anyway in what I said, in that some things are a minor error, some things are non-compliance through a lack of understanding. Then you get into endemic non-compliance, breaching regulations, but not then in other cases where they might be controlling the workers, and then you get into those where clearly there's the physical control of the accommodation, the transport, the way in which they're able to live their lives, which is how you'd sort of like separate it out purely for the purpose of identifying the levels of cases that we'd actually investigated and where they roughly fell. That was all for illustrative purposes.
Understood. That's great. Thanks for clearing that. Well, and on that note, I think I have to bring the conference to the end. I just want to thank all the panelists here, the panelists this morning, to our sponsors. As I said before, I've been going all the way through this. I see this as just the beginning for MRW, really. I want to sort of see further events. I want to sort of work with the industry more, and really get the message out there to all those waste companies that perhaps haven't seen this session or haven't been involved in the groups that have been mentioned today. Look out for a write